LoveLore Library. He had never thought that he would be a father one day, and when he found out that Lily was pregnant under such circumstances, one could imagine the anger in his heart. Therefore, he had always felt that he did not like this child. However, the soft and warm feeling that filled his heart was completely different from the feeling he had for Lily. This was his son. Right now, he needed his protection. When he grew up, he needed his guidance. Then, he would grow up to be a man as tall as him. Don't fight with me for Lily, otherwise Father will properly dote on you. Bending over, Mo Xiaoyao stared at the sleeping baby in the cradle as he warned. Yili opened her eyes in a daze and saw Mo Xiaoyao sitting by the bed with his head lowered as he said something to the baby. She couldn't help but laugh softly. Being discovered by his beloved wife, Mo Xiaoyao's face froze. He pretended that nothing had happened and sat back down on the bed as he softly said, "Why are you awake?" Yili saw that he hadn't even changed his clothes. It was clear that he hadn't slept at all. "Why aren't you resting?" Mo Xiaoyao pulled her into his embrace and said in a muffled voice, "I can't sleep." Yili sat up from his embrace and pushed the distance between them apart. She carefully looked at his expression and softly asked, "What's wrong? It can't be that you're too excited about the birth of the baby, right?" Mo Xiaoyao curled his lips in disgust as he glanced at the baby lying in the cradle. Yili helplessly smiled. From the moment the baby was born, he had already been looked down upon by his own father. If she didn't understand Mo Xiaoyao's personality and thoughts, Yili would have suspected that he hated his own child. This father and son. How would they get along in the future? "I saw that your expression wasn't right before, but I didn't have time to ask you. Did something happen?" Leaning against Mo Xiaoyao, Yili softly asked. Mo Xiaoyao raised a hand to ruffle Yili's half-falling hair. A cold light flashed in his eyes as he lightly said, "The matter of Tan Jiji and Su Zuidi that we were investigating before is about to be concluded." "Oh." Yili raised her head. Just by looking at Mo Xiaoyao's gloomy expression, she knew that this matter was very shocking. She lightly patted Mo Xiaoyao's hand and comforted him, "No matter what happens, we will always be together." Mo Xiaoyao was startled. He nodded and said, "I know. Prince, Commander Qin requests an audience." Outside, Qingyu, who was on night watch, reported in a low voice. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. He stood up and said to Yili, "I'll go take a look. Yili should rest first." Yili also knew that her body wasn't well right now. She nodded and thought for a moment before saying, "If Su Zuidi really wants to confess, there's no harm in having Elder Su listen." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. "I know. Don't worry about these things. Rest well." After helping Yili lie down and covering her with a blanket, Mo Xiaoyao turned and walked out. He glanced at Qingyu and Qingwan who were waiting at the door and said, "Take good care of the princess." Qingyu and Qingwan stood up and said, "Prince, please be at ease." In the empty room, Su Zuidi was sitting on a chair placed in the middle of the room. There wasn't even anyone in the room to watch over her. Right now, no one would be worried that she would escape or commit suicide. The large amount of blood she had just lost and the various tortures she had undergone in the past half-year, she didn't even have the strength to walk 100 steps out of this room. She had just been dragged away to be cleaned and changed into clean clothes. Su Zuidi looked at the clean clothes on her body, lost in thought. The dirty and gloomy prison life of the past half-year had almost made her forget what it was like to be clean. She could only constantly convince herself to forget in order to survive in that kind of environment. But now, she finally couldn't hold on any longer. When she felt her blood flowing out drop by drop, she finally realized how terrible death really was. If those people had come a little later, perhaps she would have already lost all her blood. From the moment she opened her mouth to beg for mercy, she had already lost. She definitely couldn't bear to let herself experience that slow and quiet death again. The door was opened from the outside and Imo Xiaoyao strolled in. Behind him were Qin Feng, Xue Jing and Feng Zhiyao. Imo Xiaoyao walked to the side and sat down. The others also took their seats one after another. Su Zuidi stared blankly at the white-haired man in front of her. The Imo Xiaoyao in front of her was dressed in white and had a head of white hair. His expression was calm and his eyes were indifferent, giving off a distant and cold feeling. This was completely different from the Imo Xiaoyao in Su Zuidi's memory. Xiao. Xiaoyao. You're Xiaoyao. Why are you? Imo Xiaoyao frowned and impatiently glanced at Qin Feng. Qin Feng looked at Su Zuidi and said in a deep voice, Miss Su, since you're willing to confess, then say it in front of Prince. It's the middle of the night and everyone doesn't have much time to waste. Chapter 440. Su Zuidi immediately sobered up, meeting the cold light in Imo Xiaoyao's eyes, and said sorrowfully, Xiaoyao, are you really not going to give me any face? Do you still remember that we grew up together? I know I was wrong. Imo Xiaoyao stood up, coldly staring at Qin Feng and said, this is the result you were talking about. Wasting Ai's time. Deal with it. Send someone to Chu capital as soon as possible. After saying that, he actually turned around and walked out. The so-called deal with naturally referred to dealing with Su Zuidi. As long as he knew a little, he wouldn't be afraid that he wouldn't be able to find out what happened afterwards. Su Zuidi's usefulness would also be insignificant, compared to facing this woman that he loathed. He might as well go back to his room and accompany Lili. Su Zuidi was stunned, clearly not expecting Imo Xiaoyao to be so heartless. She had only said a few words and he had already left impatiently. Su Zuidi felt a chill in her heart, looking at Qin Feng who was staring at her with murderous intent. She screamed in horror, No! No! I'll talk. I'll tell you whatever you want to ask. Why didn't you say so earlier? Feng Zhiyao sneered, sitting back down in his chair. What did you take away from the Prince Ding mansion that year? Qin Feng asked. Su Zuidi glanced at Imo Xiaoyao who was sitting in his chair with his eyes closed, gritted her teeth and said, It's the Mahist Army's marching formation map. I have an excellent memory since I was young. I only saw those maps once and remembered them in my heart. After leaving the Prince Ding mansion, I found them and drew them out. Everyone's expression changed, recalling the Mahist army's crushing defeat against the northern tribes 10 years ago. Qin Feng frowned and continued to ask, You gave the map to Tan Jiji and Imo Jingqi? Su Zuidi nodded and said, Yes. Imo Jingqi sent Tan Jiji to find me, asking me for help, so I agreed. What are they going to do with the map of the Mahist army? Feng Zhiyao asked. Although he already knew the answer, he still needed Su Zuidi to confirm it. Su Zuidi looked at Feng Zhiyao and suddenly giggled. What's the use? Imo Jingqi had long found the Mahist army and Imo Xiao an eyesore. Hence, he naturally gave the blueprint to the northern tribes. Otherwise, why do you think the Mahist army was ambushed by the northern tribes and suffered such heavy casualties? Qin Feng's face was gloomy. His family had been working for the Prince Ding mansion for generations. His father and several of his uncles had died in that battle. Staring at the smiling Su Zuidi, Qin Feng asked, Why did you help Imo Jingqi frame the Prince Ding mansion? This was also something that everyone was puzzled about. As the fiancé of the second young master of the Ding mansion, Su Zuidi was envied by many noble ladies. Why did she help Imo Jingqi to destroy the Prince Ding mansion? This did not benefit her at all. Su Zuidi was stunned and looked at Imo Xiaoyao who seemed to be asleep. She sneered and raised her uninjured hand to point at Imo Xiaoyao. Why? Why, do you have to ask him? Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and looked at Imo Xiuyao. Could it be that Prince Ding Mansion did something to let you down? Even so, this woman's revenge method was a little too cruel. No wonder she could last so long in Qin Fang's hands and not die. Su Zuidi chuckled and looked at Imo Xiuyao with eyes full of resentment and inexplicable love and madness. Let me down. No, he didn't let me down. But, he also didn't let me down. I, Su Zuidi, am the #1 beauty and talent in the Chu state. There are many princes and princesses who admire me. But in his eyes, I'm just an engaged fiancé. Feng Zhiyao frowned. He and Imo Xiuyao became close friends when they were young. He also saw how Imo Xiuyao treated Su Zuidi. It really wasn't bad. The second young master of the Prince Ding Mansion was famous in the capital. Many noble ladies threw themselves at him, but he never pretended to be nice. Only Su Zuidi, who was engaged, was very good to him and only close to her. So what was there for Su Zuidi to be dissatisfied with? Seeming to understand Feng Zhiyao's expression, Su Zuidi snorted and proudly said, "Even the Prince Ding Mansion was very protective of me and obeyed me. But he, since I've already been engaged to him, he won't even agree to a small request." Her words made it seem like she was lowering herself to be engaged to Imo Xiuyao. Looking at the man who was as cold as snow in front of her, Su Zuidi's eyes blurred and she said softly, "But it doesn't matter. I love him. Even if all the princes and princesses in the capital came to court me, I would only love Xiuyao." "Why? Xiuyao, why won't you even agree to a small request? The regent dotes on you so much. As long as you beg him, he will definitely pass the position of Prince Ding to you. And Imo Xiuan. He has no interest in marching and fighting. You clearly have more military achievements than him. Why do you want to give the position of Prince Ding to him? How can I only be the second young mistress of a small Prince Ding mansion for the rest of my life? Then how can I let those women step on my head? I love you so much, but you won't even do such a small request for me." The room was completely silent. Qin Feng and the other two looked at the woman sitting in the chair as if they had seen a ghost. With a few scars and a red and swollen face, coupled with the infatuation, gentleness, and resentment, her twisted expression, it was clearly exceptionally sinister and terrifying. As if she had finally vented out all the grievances she had suffered for so many years, Su Zuidi seemed to be unable to control herself. She continued to blabber, "This is all your fault. If you had been Prince Ding back then, everything would have been fine. But I only carefully tested you and you actually gave me such a look and even reprimanded me. Imo Xiuyao. This is all your fault. How can I let those ugly women step on my head and flaunt their prowess? Only I, Su Zuidi, should be a noble woman who is admired and envied by tens of thousands of people. You actually aren't willing to fight with Imo Xiuan. I'll help you. As long as Imo Xiuan dies, the position of Prince Ding will be yours and I will be Princess Ding. What's wrong with that? Why can't I help Imo Jingqi and Tan Jiji?" The more she spoke, the more excited Su Zuidi became. The expression on her face also became crazier. She pointed at Imo Xiuyao and laughed maniacally, "But, why are you injured? Why are you disfigured? Why are you a cripple? Imo Xiuyao, it's all your fault. Who asked you not to listen to me? Who asked you not to love me? If you loved me, you should have done everything I wanted to do for me, just like Han Mingyue." The first time I saw Han Mingyue, I knew he was a gullible fool. Sometimes, I also wish that you were as gullible as him. Why won't you listen to me? Isn't it enough that I love you so much? If you listened to me, how could Imo Xiuan have died? It's all your fault. How could Imo Xiuan not have died? It's you who should have died. A white figure flashed across the room. In the blink of an eye, Mo Xiaoyao was already in front of Su Zuidi. A hand mercilessly choked her slender neck. His gaze was cold as he stared at the woman who was struggling with a twisted expression. "Who killed my brother?" Mo Xiaoyao asked coldly. Su Zuidi was choked by the choke and immediately couldn't breathe. She raised her hand and tried to pry Mo Xiaoyao's hand away. But with her strength, how could she be Mo Xiaoyao's opponent? After a while, she started to roll her eyes. "Speak." Chapter 441. Mo Xiaoyao. Jing. Seeing that she was about to die, Su Zuidi suddenly let go. A large gust of air rushed in and Su Zuidi started coughing violently. "Who killed my big brother?" Mo Xiaoyao asked again. Mo Jingqi and the Lu family, as well as the northern tribes, southern Zhao, and the emperor of Xiling's clan. Mo Xiaowen did not die of illness, he was assassinated, cough cough. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao in front of her, Su Zuidi did not dare to hide anything. And the regent was killed by the late emperor's scheme. But the regent also sent people to severely injure the late emperor before he died, so the late emperor died within 2 years. This is, cough cough cough, this is what Mo Jingqi told me. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao was silent, Su Zuidi quickly said, "It's true. The late emperor had people poison the regent with drunken incense. It's a strange, colorless and tasteless poison. After being poisoned, there will be no abnormalities at first, but after 5 days, the person will show signs of a serious illness and die without treatment. No matter how skilled the doctor is, he will not be able to find the cause of death." Feng Zhiyao, Qin Feng and Zhua Jing looked at each other, their hearts trembling. Of course, they knew what drunken incense was. It was rumored that it was one of the 3 most mysterious poisons in the world, along with Heaven Underworld and Red Beauty Withered Bones, that had been lost for thousands of years. But the fact that the regent's death was related to the late emperor was even more shocking than Mo Jingqi being related to Mo Xiaowen's death. The regent Mo Lufang could be said to be a rare virtuous official. Before the late emperor ascended the throne, the Dechu state was not much better off than it was now. Xiling and the northern tribes were eyeing it covetously. At that time, Prince Ding, who was not yet 20 years old, single-handedly resisted the 2 armies of Xiling and the northern tribes. After that, he led the army to quell the rebellion. When the late emperor ascended the throne, Mo Lufang, who was in his early 20s, was conferred the title of regent. Martial arts could pacify the country and literature could govern the country. Different from many regents who usurped power and bullied the young emperor, Mo Lufang did his best to assist the previous emperor. After the previous emperor passed away, he took the initiative to resign from the position of regent. 20 years of harmony between the ruler and his subjects could be said to be a good story for all eternity. Now that Su Zuidi had revealed such a secret, how could it not be shocking? Was history really written to fool the world? Mo Xiaoyao strolled back to his seat and sat down, deep in thought. Of course. The other to Mo to ask, he said, Shui said you took 2 things from the Prince Ding mansion that year. Of that year you took two items to you to ask to Mo to ask. To ask. Where is of that thing of that? The expression on Su Zuidi's face froze, and her already ugly face became even scarier. To ask of emperor of. To say to of that to ask. To king to leave, to the king state emperor of his. Of. To his the to his. To ask. Of to his. What does it say? Su Zuidi said, the decree of Emperor Taizu is that the royal family of the Dechu state and the king state Ding will forever be brothers. If the future emperor goes against the grain and intends to harm the king state Ding, the Prince of Ding can depose the emperor and appoint a new emperor. Everyone was shocked. It was such an important thing, no wonder Mo Jingqi had to save Su Zuidi. Where is it? Feng Xiao asked. With this thing, wasn't it Mo Jingqi that bastard they were afraid of? Su Zuidi gritted her teeth and said, "Do you think I will tell you?" Su Zuidi was not a fool. After revealing these things, this was her only life-saving talisman. Mo Xiaoyao stood up and ordered in a calm voice, "Qin Feng, get rid of her." After that, he turned and walked out. Su Zuidi stared at Mo Xiaoyao in disbelief and screamed, "Don't you want Emperor Taizu's imperial decree?" Mo Xiaoyao turned back and smiled coldly, "If I want to kill Mo Jingqi, I can do it even without Emperor Taizu's decree." After that, he didn't look at Su Zuidi, who was paralyzed on the ground, and walked out of the room. Outside the door, in another room, Su Zhi, Han Mingyue, Han Mingxi, Lu Jingxian and others were all there, but their expressions were very different. Su Zhi's face was red and white, his lips and hands were trembling non-stop. It was obvious that he was very angry. Han Mingyue's face was pale, and even when Mo Xiaoyao came out, she acted as if she didn't see it. Lu Jingxian, Uncle Mo and others were angry and wanted to rush in and kill Su Zuidi immediately. The calmest one was Han Mingxi, but he also couldn't hide his shock. "Elder Su can go in and see her," Mo Xiaoyao said calmly. Su Zhi's throat made two gurgling sounds, and after a while, he could barely speak. He forced a smile and said, "I can teach her. This evil creature actually committed such a sin. How can I face the ancestors of the Su family?" With a pu sound, a mouthful of blood spurted out from Su Zhi's mouth, and his whole body collapsed. Han Mingxi, who was the closest and the most clear-headed, quickly stepped forward to support Su Zhi. Su Zhi said, "This evil creature. Prince should deal with her." Seeing that Su Zhi had fainted, Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment, then said, "Please, Mr. Shin." Lu Jingxian wanted to say something, but Uncle Mo secretly pulled him aside and said, "It's already late, it won't be too late to deal with the rest tomorrow. Besides, Princess Consort just gave birth to the little Shitzi, she will feel uneasy if she doesn't see the prince when she wakes up." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "You all should also go back early." Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao had left, Lu Jingxian said angrily, "I still have something to say, Director Mo, how can you?" Director Mo shook his head and said, "Let the prince rest first. Since the matter is already known, is there a need to be afraid of not being able to get revenge?" This kind of matter, even they were shocked when they heard it, not to mention how much of an impact it would have on the prince's heart. Prince's body wasn't good to begin with. If he collapsed because of this, then the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. Understanding that what Director Mo said was reasonable, Lu Jingxian fiercely glared at the wall in front of him and said in a rough voice, "Fine, there's still plenty of time in the future. I'm also going back." The people in the room quickly left. Han Mingyue stared blankly at the tightly shut door in front of him, but he couldn't move at all. He knew that in the room, perhaps Su Zuidi was slowly dying, but he couldn't make himself stand up and push open the door that wasn't locked at all. The first time I saw Han Mingyue, I knew that he was a gullible idiot. The first time, in the peach blossom forest, the 14-year-old boy saw the 13-year-old girl in pink dancing to her words. "Is young Master Xiaoyao's friend? Zuidi greets young Master Mingyu." From then on, she fell into a love barrier and couldn't break free. Early in the morning, hearing light footsteps outside, Yili opened her eyes. Looking sideways at the empty seat beside her, Mo Xiaoyao didn't come back last night. Qing Shuang came in with water. Seeing that Yili had woken up, she hurriedly put down the basin and carefully helped Yili sit up. Yili nodded and asked, "Prince didn't come back last night?" Qing Shuang nodded and said, I heard from Qing Yu and Qing Wanjijia that the prince rested in the study last night. Do you want this servant to invite the prince over? Mama has instructed that Wang Fei is going through confinement now and can't get out of bed. Yili shook her head and looked at herself helplessly. In this era, confinement was really unbearable, but she didn't intend to make things difficult for her body. Looking sideways at the little baby who was still sleeping soundly in the cradle, she couldn't help but smile. Why is baby still sleeping? Wei Mama came in with a bowl of porridge. Hearing this, she couldn't help but smile. Wang Fei is young and hasn't taken care of a child before, so you don't know. This newborn child eats and sleeps every day. The little Shitzi will grow faster if he sleeps more. Chapter 442. Yili smiled as she took the hot towel that Qing Shuang handed her to wipe her face and hands. She then used warm water to rinse her mouth before taking the porridge from Wei Wei and tasting it. The light and pleasant taste made Yili sigh in relief. Have you arranged for the little Shitzi's wet nurses? Wei Mama smiled and said, we have prepared 4 wet nurses long ago. We know them well. Wang Fei, don't worry. Hearing this, Yili frowned slightly and said, 4 is too many. Leave 1 or 2 first. Other than feeding time, send the little Shitzi to me at other times. Wei Mama looked with some difficulty at Yili. Even though she was also Wang Fei's wet nurse, she approved of not letting the wet nurses get too close to the little Shitzi. Otherwise, when the little Shitzi grew up with the wet nurses, he would not be close to Wang Fei. But if Wang Fei personally took care of him, she was afraid that the prince would not be happy. Yili smiled faintly and said, let's do it this way. When the child is 1 year old, it will be about time to stop breastfeeding. At that time, we can arrange for the wet nurses to go elsewhere. She did not plan for the wet nurses to raise the child, nor did she plan for a group of wet nurses and servant girls to surround the child. She did not want to raise a Jia Baoyu in the future. Wei Mama reminded her in a small voice, if Wang Fei personally takes care of the little Shitzi, the prince will not be happy. Yili smiled and said, it's not a problem. Usually, the wet nurse and Lin Mama will help me. When he grows up, he won't need anyone to take care of him. Wei Mama finally agreed. She bent down to pick up the infant who was about to wake up and went to find the wet nurse to feed him. After finishing a bowl of porridge, Yili handed the bowl to Qing Xia, who was serving beside her, and asked, did anything happen last night? Qing Shuang replied, Elder Su, who was staying in Nanyuan last night, seemed to be ill. The prince asked Sir Shen and Dr. Lin to treat him. I heard that his illness is very serious. Qing Xia also nodded and said, Prince hasn't gone out since he returned to his study last night. I heard that the person who delivered breakfast this morning was also stopped outside. Yili frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, Qing Shuang, go to the kitchen again and send a portion of breakfast to Prince. Tell him that I ordered it. Also, ask Commander Qin to come over. Tell him I have something to ask him. Qing Shuang nodded and said, this servant will go now. Your subordinate, Qin Feng, requests an audience with your highness. Not long after, Qin Feng appeared outside the door and asked for an audience. Yili said softly, come in. Yili and Mo Xiaoyao had never paid much attention to such formalities. Now that Yili couldn't go out, Qin Feng stood in front of the screen with the painting of a misty rain in the room and replied. Qin Feng also understood what Yili wanted to ask. Without waiting for Yili to ask in detail, he told her what happened last night in detail. This naturally included the treatment of Su Zuidi. Su Zuidi struggled for more than half a year, but in the end, she still came to the end. But before she died, she still told him the whereabouts of the ancestors' decree. If Mo Xiaoyao didn't want that thing, then Suzuki would not be his life-saving talisman, but a piece of waste paper. That thing was still in the Chu capital. Back then, Suzuki left in a hurry with the help of Han Mingyue, so she didn't have time to look for the thing she hid. What's more, that thing was more like a talisman that hastened her death. Hearing Qin Feng's words, Yi Li was also startled. Although after the incident with Tan Jiji, Yi Li had some guesses about this matter, but it was far from being as shocking as hearing it for herself. What's more, it also involved the life and death of the late emperor and the regent Mo Lufang. It seemed that the imperial family had been trying to get rid of the Prince Ding mansion for a long time. Does the prince have any plans to deal with this matter? Yi Li asked. Qin Feng shook his head and said, the prince has been locked in the study since last night, and hasn't issued any orders. Yi Li nodded. This was undoubtedly the biggest impact on Mo Xiaoyao, and he really needed time to think about it. It wasn't until noon that Mo Xiaoyao came back with a tired body. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, Yi Li knew that he must have not slept all night. Sighing, she didn't allow him to say anything and said softly, sleep for a while first, we'll talk about it when you wake up. Mo Xiaoyao was extremely tired. Earlier, he was angry because of Xue Qingliang's confession, then he was tense because of Yi Li's labor, and last night, he was shaken because of what Suzuki had revealed. If it wasn't for the fact that Mo Xiaoyao had made great progress in his cultivation these past few years, he probably wouldn't have waited for Suzuki to finish speaking and would have killed her with his sword and led his troops to the capital. From yesterday morning until now, Mo Xiaoyao hadn't closed his eyes. Too many things had happened today, how could he not be tired? Lying on his side on the bed, Mo Xiaoyao glanced at Yi Li who was tucking him in. After opening and closing his eyes a few times, he finally fell into a deep sleep. Looking down at the man who was sleeping restlessly, Yi Li could only sigh softly. Leaning against the headboard, she closed her eyes and thought about the northwest. Now that the truth of what had happened that year was revealed, to be able to wake Mo Xiaoyao up, the situation in the northwest and Chu state had changed. Yi Li didn't want to stop Mo Xiaoyao from doing anything. Just like the Mahist army, Mo Xiaoyao had been suppressed for too long. And the actions of the person in the Chu palace didn't make people believe that he was a good ruler who loved his people like his own children. Big brother. Father. Big brother. Big brother. Mo Xiaoyao murmured in his sleep, as if he had fallen into a terrifying dream. Yi Li remembered the meter of Suzuki that Qin Feng had mentioned and her heart trembled. Gently patting the blanket on his body, she whispered, this isn't your fault, Xiaoyao, don't be afraid, it's not your fault, father, big brother. When Mo Xiaoyao woke up, he heard Yi Li's soft laughter by his ear. Opening his eyes, Yi Li was sitting next to him, leaning against the bed. She was holding the baby in light purple swaddling clothes and playing with him. There was a soft and gentle smile on her beautiful face. Yi Li turned her head and saw Mo Xiaoyao open his eyes. She couldn't help but smile and say, are you done? Look at the baby. Mo Xiaoyao sat up and looked at the baby in the swaddling clothes. He was looking at the two of them with watery eyes. The red and wrinkled face from yesterday was much better. Even though it wasn't completely white and tender, it was still very different from the red little monkey from yesterday. Yi Li lovingly cradled the baby and gently rocked him. This child was really too good at sleeping. Other than when he was born, this was the first time she had seen him awake. Hee, the baby can't see right now. In a few days, he will become more and more adorable. Mo Xiaoyao silently watched as Yi Li played with the baby. Even though he felt that the little boy was particularly annoying, he didn't say anything. He only quietly watched as Yi Li's smile became more gentle and kind. His originally cold and hard expression couldn't help but soften. When the baby fell asleep again, Yi Li called for Wei Momo to carry him out. Turning her head to look at Imo Xiuyao's side, she saw that his face was still somewhat gloomy and said softly, "Those things weren't your fault. Big brother won't blame you." Imo Xiuyao was stunned. When he regained his senses, he finally understood what Yili was talking about. He raised his hand to ruffle the hair behind Yili's head and said with a dry voice, "Mother passed away not long after giving birth to me. Father was also busy with court affairs. It could be said that it was Big Brother who raised me since I was young. Originally, I wanted to wait for Big Brother to inherit the throne and then assist him wholeheartedly. For many generations, the Ding King's residence had only one heir. It was only in our generation that Big Brother and I were born. We brothers naturally had to work together. Furthermore, with my ability, even if I can't obtain any title, I can't just idle around in the Prince Ding mansion and be a hedonistic son of rich parents." Yili naturally knew this. Actually, Mo Xiuan and Imo Xiuyao were only 7 to 8 years apart. Yili could almost imagine the scene when Imo Xiuan, who was only 7 to 8 years old, carried his newborn brother and guarded the cold and empty Prince Ding mansion. It was no wonder that the relationship between the two brothers was so good. In Imo Xiuyao's heart, the position of Big Brother was not inferior to that of Father King Mo Lufang. It was also because of this that Imo Xiuyao, who was only in his teens, had already entered the battlefield. It was also to tell Father and Big Brother that even if he couldn't inherit the throne, he could still fulfill his ambitions and live a carefree life. Chapter 443. It's just that I underestimated that bitch Su Zuidi. If it wasn't for me. At that time, Su Zuidi had indeed mentioned the matter of the Prince Ding mansion's throne to him. At that time, he had fiercely reprimanded Su Zuidi and ordered her not to mention this matter again, and then put it to the back of his mind. At that time, he thought that with his relationship with his big brother, how could he be instigated by a woman, and even more so, he didn't think that Su Zuidi would have any tricks up her sleeve. But he didn't think that because of this, he would plant a seed of disaster for the Prince Ding mansion and his big brother. Even he himself had to pay a heavy price. Yili sighed softly and comforted him softly, "Big brother won't blame you, Xiuyao, this isn't your fault." Since Mo Jingqi already had the intention to deal with the Prince Ding mansion and big brother, even if Su Zuidi didn't have that intention, she might have let them find other opportunities. Hugging Yili in his arms, Mo Xiuyao said hatefully, "Mo Jingqi. I will definitely make him suffer a fate worse than death." Yili smiled and patted his shoulder, softly saying, "No matter what you do, I and everyone in the Mahist army will support you." After resting for a while and seeing that Mo Xiuyao had calmed down a lot, Yili asked, "Xiuyao, do you have any plans in mind? Nowadays, there are a lot of things happening in the Northwest. Recently, there have been several generations of passers-by that have entered the Northwest. I'm afraid that the area around Hong Province has been turned upside down by those people. Unfortunately, these people didn't know that entering the Emperor Gaozu's mausoleum from the northwest was simply wishful thinking. Unless they forcefully dug up the mausoleum, even if Tan Jiji came, he could only take a detour. Nowadays, in the northwest, apart from the Mahist army, who would dare to dig up the mausoleum with great fanfare? Of course, the Mahist army wouldn't dig up the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu's mausoleum. Although the previous dynasty had already perished, the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu was still a great hero passed down to future generations. Moreover, digging up a grave, no matter whose grave it was, the reputation wouldn't be good. In any case, the imperial mausoleum was in the northwest, not too far from Ruyang City. Apart from Tan Jiji and Dr. Lin, no one knew what was inside better than Yili. Since it's there, it couldn't run, she naturally wouldn't be in a hurry. Mo Xiuyao sneered. Since Mo Jingqi is so impatient, this king naturally has to give him a big gift. I Xiuyao's the Emperor Gaozu's, I Xiu, ts Xiu's, S, SSSS, S. F. STS. T's to TTTTS is ST, S father father, S father and you used to come to invite him's twos to invites twos to come, as of this master ST's ye. If one were to say that Mo Jingqi did not send people to monitor his grandfather and uncle, even the newborn Mo Xiaobao would not believe it. Although they had also arranged for people to protect the safety of Lishan Academy, it was impossible for Lishan Academy to not attract attention without these two people, regardless of whether they went openly or secretly. If possible, Yili naturally hoped to bring grandfather and eldest uncle's family to the northwest. But with grandfather's temperament, he definitely wouldn't agree. Therefore, rashly calling them over would instead draw them into the whirlpool of battle. Mo Xiaoyao chuckled softly. A few days ago, I read the ideas you wrote about governing the Northwest. Education is indeed very important. However, the Northwest region was far away, and unlike Yunzhou, there weren't many scholars. Over the generations, there weren't many outstanding scholars. Even if we want to open an academy in the future, I'm afraid we won't be able to find a good teacher to teach us. We'll have to ask Mr. Qing Yun and Mr. Hongyu for help. Yili blushed slightly and said, I was just writing something randomly, if there's anything inappropriate. Mo Xiaoyao laughed and said, how could there be anything inappropriate? My Yili is indeed a unique and wondrous woman. Not only could he mount a horse to kill the enemy, but he could also govern the country. Compared to Lili, those ministers of the imperial court are all useless. Yili felt even more embarrassed to be praised by Mo Xiaoyao so bluntly. Back then, when she had written those things, she had not thought too much about it. She had only thought that the Northwest would be a mess after the war. Neither she nor Mo Xiaoyao had any experience in governing a place. Rather than being in a mess, it was better to think about it first so that they wouldn't be caught unprepared. However, what happened next was not something Yili could have predicted. Fortunately, the Northwest had not suffered as much damage as she had imagined. Mo Xiaoyao had also taken down all the places other than Feihong Pass with lightning speed, easing the post-war situation in the Northwest. Hugging Yili, Mo Xiaoyao sat with his back against the headboard. His brows furrowed as he pondered. Actually, I still hope that Mr. Qing Yun and Mr. Hongyu can come to the Northwest, as well as Lord Su and young Master Qing Qin. In the future, there will be more and more things happening in the Northwest. The Prince Ding Mansion has many generals, but when it comes to governing a place, there isn't even half a person who has the talent to help the people. The Prince Ding Mansion was built on military exploits. Although the past Prince Ding had been good at both civil and military affairs, his subordinates were still generals. After all, the Prince Ding Mansion was not the imperial court. There was no need for so many civil officials to govern or participate in politics. Yili thought for a moment and said, Big Brother is now in the Northwest. As long as he receives the letter, he will come to see the child. However, it won't be so easy for grandfather and uncle to leave Yunzhou. Why don't I go there myself? No. Yili was pulled back into his arms. Mo Xiaoyao rested his chin on Yili's shoulder and said in a low voice, I will personally write a letter to the old man to discuss with him about Mr. Qing Yun. You are not allowed to go anywhere. Yili raised her eyebrows. This was too domineering. Before Yili could speak, Mo Xiaoyao rubbed his chin. His domineering voice immediately became very aggrieved and careful. Yili, don't go. Don't leave me. A small arrow shot into Yili's heart. Her face darkened. When did this person become so shameless? Yili. You want to leave me again. Otherwise, I will go with you wherever you go, okay? I'm afraid. If something happens to you, I will throw Mo Xiaobao away and let him become an orphan without parents. He will wander around and not know his next meal. Yili couldn't help but reach out and pinch his waist. That is your son. What kind of deep hatred do you have for him? Mo Xiaoyao didn't care about this. He grimaced in pain but still didn't change his words. It was only when he saw Yili's slightly narrowed eyes that he reluctantly stopped and asked, Yili won't abandon me. Yili sighed and said, No, I'm just saying. You and the baby are both here. Where else can I go? Only then did Mo Xiaoyao hug Yili with satisfaction. If Master Qingyun didn't come, in 2 years, he would secretly give Mo Xiaobao to him. Yili belonged to him and him alone. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao who was lazily hugging her, Yili helplessly sighed in her heart. She picked up the previous topic and continued, You mean to say that you want to hold a big celebration for the baby's 1-month-old? Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, The birth of I's heir should be held in a big way. Don't those people want to come to the northwest to search for treasures? Rather than having them come here in secret, why don't we invite them here in the open? I want to see what kind of imperial jade seal they can find. Even if there really was an imperial jade seal, without his permission, he wanted to see who could take it away from the northwest. Chapter 444. Yili's heart skipped a beat. You're thinking of, Mo Xiaoyao gave a sinister smile, isn't it said that the one who obtains the imperial jade seal will obtain the world? Then let's see who will be able to obtain the imperial jade seal and who will be able to obtain the world. Yili lowered her brows and pondered for a moment. If the imperial jade seal were to leak out from the Prince Ding mansion, it wouldn't be a good thing. I've got it. Thinking of the bright yellow silk that she had brought out from the imperial mausoleum, Yili suddenly smiled. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao, she said, I had forgotten that I had brought out a treasure map from the imperial mausoleum. The birth of the Ding kingdom's little heir had spread throughout the world in an extremely flamboyant manner in a short period of time. Furthermore, Prince Ding had decided to hold a 1-month-old banquet for the little heir, inviting all the influential and famous people of various countries. Adding on to the news that the imperial jade seal and the previous dynasty's treasure had appeared in the northwest, countless people had rushed to the northwest of the Chu state. Chu capital Su resident Su Qingyan looked at the letter in his hand with a surprised and happy expression. Even the hand that was holding the letter couldn't help but tremble. Su Qingbai sat at the side and looked at Su Hongyan's uncontrollable excitement. He couldn't help but ask curiously, Second uncle, did something happen on second brother's side? Su Qingyan handed over the letter and said, Li gave birth to a boy. After training outside for a long time, Su Qingbai was obviously much more mature than before. Hearing this news, he couldn't help but have a hint of joy on his lips. In the end, Su Hongyan carefully read the letter that he handed over and smiled, This is great. Grandfather will definitely be very happy when he hears this news. Su Hongyan nodded repeatedly. Last year, after Lear had met with danger and disappeared, his father's health had become extremely poor. It wasn't easy for him to get the news that Lear was safe and sound. Now that Lear had safely given birth to a son, his father would definitely be very happy when he heard this good news that he had become a great-grandfather. The housekeeper standing at the door looked at the old master and fourth young master who had lost their composure and reminded, Old master, fourth young master. The person who came to send you off is still waiting outside the door. Although he was also very happy that Miss Li gave birth to a child, he still had to have the proper etiquette. He couldn't let the messenger wait there for nothing. Su Hongyan came back to his senses and nodded, Reward. No, quickly invite the person who delivered the letter in. This old master still has some things to ask him. The head steward responded and hurriedly went out to invite him. Not long after, a young man in ordinary clothes walked in. He cupped his hands and smiled at Su Hongyan, Lord Su, fourth young master, long time no see. Su Hongyan was taken aback. Seeing the young man raise his head and reveal his handsome face under his slightly messy hair, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Young Master Feng-san." The young man was none other than Feng Zhiyao, who was supposed to be in the northwest. Without waiting for Su Hongyan to invite him to take a seat, Feng Zhiyao walked to a chair at the side and slumped down. He let out a long sigh and complained, in order to return before the news was sent back to the capital, this young master ran 3 fine horses to death along the way. "I'm so tired." He had set out the day after the little heir was born and had only used 3 days to rush back to the capital. Compared to now, the news of the little heir's birth was still on the way. Su Hongyan was stunned and looked at Feng Zhiyao in a daze. It was Su Qingbai who asked, "Young Master Feng-san, other than the matter of cousin Li and little nephew, is there something else?" Feng Zhiyao jerked the corner of his mouth and forced out a smile, but it was more like a bitter smile. "If there's nothing else, how could the prince be willing to let me return to the capital to be carefree at this time? Although, returning to the capital might not be as easy as staying in the northwest." Su Hongyan also came back to his senses. Hearing Feng Zhiyao's words, he hurriedly asked, "Did something happen?" Feng Zhiyao didn't have time to ask for water. He grabbed a pot of herbal tea from the side and poured it into his mouth. Then he looked at Su Hongyan and said, "The prince and Wang Fei hope that official Su and 4th young master will leave the capital with me and head to the northwest." Su Hongyan's expression froze. He and Su Qingbai were the only members of the Su clan left in the capital. In other words, they were hostages of the court. Once they left without the emperor's permission, then the Su family and the imperial family would be completely at odds. Seeing Su Hongyan's expression, Feng Zhiyao knew that Su Hongyan was in a difficult position. He said in a heavy voice, "I won't hide it from official Su. The Prince Ding mansion and the court's relationship is irreversible. If official Su and 4th young master remain in the capital, I'm afraid it will be disadvantageous for you too." Su Hongyan frowned and said, "It's fine if we leave. There's only our family in the capital. But the Su clan has been in Yunzhou for 100 years. If the emperor wants to find trouble, where can't he find it?" Feng Zhiyao took out another letter and handed it over, saying, "This was written by the prince and Wang Fei. I have personally delivered the same letter to Mr. Qingyun in Yunzhou. But I have no time to stay in Yunzhou for long. Mr. Qingyun and Mr. Hongyu must have made a decision by now." Su Hongyu took the letter in confusion and opened it. He frowned and read it. Soon, his expression changed greatly. His usually calm face was filled with anger. After a long time, he said angrily, "Absurd. There's such a thing, the emperor actually. It's really..." Slapping the letter on the table, Su Hongyan raised his head and stared at Feng Zhiyao, saying, "3rd young master Feng, is the letter true?" Feng Zhiyao smiled bitterly and said, "Does official Su think this is something that can be casually made up?" Su Hongyan was speechless. Everything in the letter was shocking. Which one of them could be casually made up? But this kind of matter was too hard to believe. Su Qingbai looked at his clearly angry second uncle. He quietly stood and walked to the table to pick up the letter on the table. He didn't read it. Even though Su Qingbai felt that he was mentally prepared, he was still frightened. The people of the imperial family, were they really this crazy? At the same time, the young Su Qingbai was extremely disappointed and angry at the person on the dragon throne and the court. He looked down, folded the letter, and gently put it back on the table. Su Qingbai laughed in a low voice and said, "Second uncle, for this, is it worth it?" His father had the talent to help the world, but could not become an official. He could only stay in Lishan Academy to teach students. His second uncle was also a true talent, but for more than a decade, he was forced to stay in the position of imperial censor and watch the intrigue in the court. The 5 brothers could only suppress their talents and temperaments. Yet, how long would this suppression last? Their generation or until the Su family was destroyed? No wonder his eldest brother was not willing to become an official in court. He probably already saw that this kind of life would never end. Su Hongyan gritted his teeth and did not speak. But his tightly clenched hands made it clear that he also found it difficult to calm down. The Prince Ding mansion and the imperial family were of the same bloodline. For generations, they worked hard for the Dechu state and still ended up like this. There was no need to talk about the Su family. In the Dechu state, the Su family had no other choice but to quietly die. Feng Zhiyao sat silently in the chair and looked at the two people in front of him. The Su family was not the only one bitterly disappointed by this matter. Even someone like Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but be filled with coldness and anger. Su Hongyan put away the letter and raised his head to look at Feng Zhiyao. Presumably, third young Master Feng has other matters to attend to in the capital. Please allow me to consider for a few days before giving you a reply. Feng Zhiyao did indeed have many matters to attend to. He stood and nodded. Of course. After official Su has made a decision, you only need to have someone send a message to me. I still need to stay in the capital for a few more days. This matter is not urgent. I will take my leave now. Seeing Feng Zhiyao walk out, Su Hongyan frowned and said, Third young Master Feng. Feng Zhiyao turned his head. Official Su has other orders. Chapter 445. Su Hongyan sighed and said, If it's convenient for young Master Feng-san, you should go back to the Feng clan and take a look. In the past year, Master Feng has come to the Fu several times to ask about you. How can there be an overnight grudge between father and son? You have to know that the son wants to raise his family, but the father can't wait. Feng Zhiyao clearly didn't expect Su Hongyan to talk to him about this and was surprised. When he heard the phrase, want to raise his family, but the father can't wait, his expression changed. The smile on his face was a bit bitter as he nodded and said, Many thanks for great Master Su's reminder. He was the son of a concubine in the family and had never been valued by his father. When he was young, he was almost kicked out of the family because of his unruly behavior. Last year, before he left with the army, he completely broke off relations with the family. The Feng clan had already publicly declared that the Feng clan and Feng Zhiyao had no relationship. Now, where could he go to see? Qingqing Lane, which had changed its owner and courtesan, was still the most famous dance and music venue in the capital. However, the once famous young Master Feng-san was no longer a guest of honor in Qingqing Lane. He could only secretly enter through the back door. He pushed open a remote room in the depths of the corridor. There was already someone waiting in the room. When the other person saw Feng Zhiyao push open the door and enter, he raised his head and smiled. Feng Zhiyao, it's rare to see you like this. It really leaves a deep impression. Young Master Feng-san had always been very ostentatious. Even on the battlefield, he still wore a red brocade robe that was dazzling. However, right now, he was wearing ordinary cotton clothes. Even his handsome face that made people raise their eyebrows had been modified a bit and became a bit mediocre. Feng Zhiyao gave a dissatisfied snort and looked at the cotton clothes on his body with disdain. That's why this young master doesn't like to do these shady things. It's really too unglamorous. You just went to the Su Manor. The young man was the second young master of the Leng clan, General Murong's son-in-law, Leng Haoyu. Leng Haoyu now took over all of the properties and power of the Prince Ding mansion in the Dechu state. Normally, he could only hide behind the scenes and not show off in front of people. The two most famous playful young masters of the Chu capital in the past had both disappeared without a trace. This made all the talented women of the Chu capital very disappointed. Feng Zhiyao nodded and said, There's no need to worry about the Su family. Lord Su and fourth young Master Su are both smart people. What we need to do is more troublesome. How's the investigation going? Any news? Lang Haoyu shook his head helplessly. Mo Jingqi is extremely suspicious. No one knows the whereabouts of the sky-falling flower. I'm afraid even his mother, the Empress Dowager, doesn't know. Feng Zhiyao also sighed. It doesn't matter. The thing is always in the Chu Palace. I don't believe that we won't be able to find it even if we turn the entire palace upside down. With Mo Jingqi's personality, it was impossible for such a treasure to be placed too far away from him. After thinking for a while, Feng Zhiyao said, let's find Taizu's posthumous edict first and settle down Lord Su and young Master Su. If we still can't find the Bailuo flower by then, let others escort the Su family in the east and west back to the northwest. I'll stay and continue to look. Lang Haoyu raised his eyebrows and looked at him. Prince and Wang Fei didn't intend to let you stay in the capital? Besides, I won't leave the capital in the near future. I'll look for it myself. What are you doing in the capital? Feng Zhiyao glared at him angrily. I'll naturally report to Prince and Wang Fei. You have so many things to do. How long will it take you to find the sky-falling flower? Lang Haoyu helplessly touched his nose. Did he look like someone who couldn't tell what was important and didn't know what to do first? Looking at Feng Zhiyao's motionless eyes staring at him, Lang Haoyu admitted defeat and sighed. He waved his hand and said, as long as Wang Yi and Wang Fei agree, it's fine. I don't care about your business. Only then did Feng Zhiyao snort in satisfaction. He took the wine from the table and drank by himself. Late at night several shadows quickly flew over the palace wall and entered the palace. Since more than a month ago, the security of the Chu Palace had become stricter. From time to time, groups of palace guards and eunuchs could be seen patrolling. But these didn't hinder the people who wanted to enter. Several shadows avoided the patrolling guards like ghosts and went into the depths of the palace. In the Empress's palace, Empress Hua changed out of the heavy and graceful decorations and clothes she wore during the day. She only wore a light purple gauze dress. Her beautiful hair was casually tied up with a purple jade hairpin. She sat down and was lost in thought while holding a scroll. After washing away the exquisite and gorgeous makeup, the Empress's beautiful face was less graceful and noble. It was more gentle and young. She didn't look like a mother of a 9-year-old child who was only 30 years old. She looked more like a beautiful young woman in her early 20s. A breeze suddenly blew through the half-closed window, causing the candlelight in the palace hall to sway. The Empress was startled. When she came back to her senses, she suddenly felt that there was something more in the palace hall. She suddenly turned around and saw a tall black figure standing in the corner not far away looking at her. The Empress was shocked and quickly said in unison, "Who is it?" "It's me." The man in black walked out. His handsome peach blossom eyes looked at the woman in purple under the lamp with a complicated expression. The strange and somewhat familiar voice made the Empress stunned. When she saw the man in black's face, she was completely stunned. She frowned and said, "Why are you in the palace?" Then she remembered that her exclamation just now might attract the guards and palace maids. She quickly went to the window and covered it. "You don't have to worry. No one will come." The man in black was young Master Feng San, Feng Zhiyao. The Empress breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at the handsome young man in black, she couldn't help but sigh. She turned around and poured a cup of tea. She pointed to the chair on the side and said, "Sit down and talk. Aren't you in the northwest? Why did you come back? Why are you in the palace?" Feng Zhiyao looked at the blue and white teacup in front of him and said in a low voice, "I came back on the order of the prince to do something. I also came to see you. Don't you welcome me?" His voice suddenly became a little bitter. The Empress was stunned for a moment. She smiled and said, "Why? Usually, very few people I used to know come to see me. There are only so many people coming and going in the palace." Feng Zhiyao stared at her and asked, "How have you been these years?" The atmosphere in the hall was a little heavy. The Empress smiled faintly and said, "The Empress of a country, the mother of the world. What's wrong with that? Let's not talk about this. We haven't seen each other for many years." Feng Zhiyao said faintly, 12 years, 11 years and 6 months. The Empress' smile was a little forced. "I didn't expect you to remember so clearly." For a moment, the two were speechless. Feng Zhiyao seriously looked at the woman in front of him. Everyone said that Su Zuidi was the #1 beauty in the Chu capital. But in Feng Zhiyao's eyes, he never thought that Su Zuidi was that beautiful. In his eyes, the most beautiful woman was always the one who gently helped the 9-year-old girl who was pushed to the ground and beaten by her brothers. It was she who wiped the stains on his face and told him with a smile that if he didn't want to be bullied, he had to work hard to become strong. It was she who held his hand and secretly went to the Prince Ding mansion to ask Xiuyao to practice martial arts with him. It was also she who secretly sent people to give him medicine and money when he was sick and had no one to take care of him. From then on, in Feng Zhiyao's eyes, there was only that gentle and noble woman. Unfortunately, the distance between them was too far. He was the son of a concubine of a merchant family. Even if the Feng family was one of the 4 richest merchants in the Dechu state, they couldn't compare to a family of scholars, farmers, businessmen. And she was indeed the most noble daughter of the Duquo family. Later on, the late emperor personally chose the wife of Mo Jingqi, who was still a prince at the time. Between them, even if their relationship was the most intimate, it was only him calling her sister Feng. Even if it was this name, after he turned 13, he was not willing to call her that anymore. Chapter 446. The Empress felt a bit uncomfortable being stared at by him. They really had not seen each other for 12 years. The once immature and delicate youth had now grown into a handsome man. Even she had heard of young Master Feng San's reputation in the capital, even in the palace. She still remembered that year. On the night before her wedding, it was raining heavily. That youth had dodged the heavy guards of the Hua country manor and arrived in front of her door. His face was filled with apprehension as he asked her, "Can you not marry Prince Qi?" When she shook her head, the young man's eyes, which were as bright as the stars, slowly turned dark and dull. At that time, she did not understand the youth's thoughts. She only thought that he was reluctant to part with his older sister who had taken care of him again. But when she saw the youth glance at her with disappointment and dejectedly leave, she did not know why, but her heart felt heavy and she could not help but cry. Slowly, she understood why the youth was disappointed, but they had already drifted apart. She was Prince Qi's wife and the Empress of Dechu State. He was still the Feng family's 3rd young master, but his youth was famous in the capital. In reality, perhaps it was best to never see each other. "Ah Yao, how have you been these years?" After a long time, the Empress finally broke the silence. "Don't call me Ah Yao." Feng Zhiyao glared and growled. The Empress was surprised and suddenly remembered that she had also called the young Mo Xiuyao Yao. Although the characters were different, they all sounded the same. So every time she called him Ah Yao, he would always throw a tantrum. But it seemed that she could not find another name, so she continued to call him that. Thinking of this, the Empress couldn't help but smile. Feng Zhiyao clearly remembered the embarrassing events of his youth. His expression stiffened as he turned his face away. The light in the hall was a bit dim, so it was impossible to see if he was blushing. The Empress stood and said with a faint smile, "You're already this old, yet you're still throwing a tantrum. You didn't come to the palace so late just to see me. Is there something you need?" Feng Zhiyao looked at her beautiful face under the light and suddenly said, "Leave with me. Leave with me." Looking at the woman in front of him who was clearly frightened, Feng Zhiyao repeated in a deep voice. The Empress was shocked by his words. After a while, she recovered and shook her head. A trace of anger rose in Feng Zhiyao's eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "Why?" The Empress lowered her eyes, hiding the sadness in her eyes. She raised her eyes to look at Feng Zhiyao, but there was a faint smile on her face as she said, "I am the Emperor's wife, the Empress of Dechu State. Anyone can leave, but I can't." Although she didn't have the so-called love between a man and a woman towards Emo Jingqi, she didn't feel any dissatisfaction when the previous emperor appointed their marriage. Since that was the case, whether the future was good or bad, it had nothing to do with others. She and Emo Jingqi were husband and wife, and he was the father of her daughter. She didn't love him, but she had to accompany him. In the past, she didn't understand Feng Zhiyao's thoughts. Now that she understood, she couldn't go with him. Taking away the Empress of Dechu State from the Dechu Palace was not a good thing for Feng Zhiyao. Feng Zhiyao stared fiercely at the Empress' calm smile, almost biting his lips until they bled. The Empress looked at him and said in a quiet voice, "You're not young anymore. I heard that Princess Ding is already pregnant. You and Prince Ding are the same age, so you should have found a good girl to marry a long time ago." Yao, Jijia thanks you for coming to see me. But, don't come back in the future. The palace isn't a place where you can come and go as you please. It's not good for you or me. Feng Zhiyao suddenly stood up and stared at the imperial family. Good. Good. It was my own unrequited love. I shouldn't have come to disturb the Empress' life. I'll leave now. Although he said this, his feet didn't move at all. Once he said this, Feng Zhiyao's heart was filled with regret. He knew that she only said this to chase him away, not because she was afraid he would bring trouble to her. The Empress sighed softly and said, "You really have a childish temper. Go back." Feng Zhiyao stared at the Empress and couldn't speak for a while. He wanted to tell the Empress what Emo Jingqi had done. He wanted to tell the Empress that Prince Ding definitely would not let go of Emo Jingqi. He wanted to beg her to leave with him. But he understood her. Even if she knew this, she would not leave with him. Because ever since she stepped onto the Qi Wang Fu's bridal sedan, her life's glory and disgrace were all tied to Emo Jingqi. Even if Emo Jingqi really became the ruler of a destroyed country, she would only accompany him to die for the country. Is it that no matter what Emo Jingqi does, you will not leave him? Feng Zhiyao said coldly. The Empress paused. She was a very intelligent woman. Hearing Feng Zhiyao say this, she understood that Emo Jingqi must have done something that he should not have done. A faint bitter smile rose to her lips and she said, "As the Empress, it is my fault that I cannot advise the Emperor. If something happens, I can only bear it with him. Yao, leave. Don't come back. If there is a chance in the future, help me, take care of Chang'e." Feng Zhiyao was silent. Although young Master Feng San was quick-witted and eloquent, he would never be a match for her. She only had to look at him indifferently, and he would not be able to say anything. After a long silence, Feng Zhiyao nodded. He looked at the Empress and said, "Okay, I'm leaving, take care of yourself." Seeing Feng Zhiyao quickly disappear into the night through the window, the Empress stared dazedly at the flickering candlelight in front of her. After a long time, she only gave a faint sigh. Feng Zhiyao walked out of the palace gate, passed through the streets, alleys, courtyards, and pavilions of the capital, and landed in the backyard of Qingqing Lane with dew and coldness. At this time, it was already 4:00 in the morning. Even such a place of prostitution had long returned to tranquility. Feng Zhiyao stepped into indulgence, kicked open the door and walked in. Lang Haoyu, who was waiting inside, was startled by him. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Feng Zhiyao shook his head, walked to the table and sat down. He grabbed a pot of wine on the table and raised his head to pour it into his mouth. Lang Haoyu supported his chin and looked at him. He knew that he must have encountered something bad. He reached out and patted Feng Zhiyao's shoulder and said, "What can't you get over it? Later, this brother will drink with you for 3 days and 3 nights until we are drunk. But now, how did you go to the palace? Did you find the whereabouts of the biluo flower?" Feng Zhiyao put down the wine pot, frowned and shook his head. Qi Lin's people almost turned Mo Jingqi's palace upside down, but there was not the slightest trace of it. Lang Haoyu frowned and said, "Could it be that Tan Jiji lied to us?" Feng Zhiyao shook his head and said, "No, the Holy Maiden of Nanjiang is still locked up in the northwest. The Crown Princess of Nanjiang and young Master Qingchen are good friends. If the Holy Maiden of Nanjiang dies, Tan Jiji's power in Nanzhao will be gone." Lang Haoyu knocked his forehead with some distress. After thinking for a while, he looked up at Feng Zhiyao and asked, "If we directly ask Mo Jingqi, do you think it's possible?" "Ask Mo Jingqi." Feng Zhiyao was stunned and looked at Lang Haoyu in confusion. Lang Haoyu shook his folding fan and said, "I'm afraid that in this world, other than Mo Jingqi himself, no one knows where he hid the biluo flower. If we don't ask the question, what else can we do? Whether it's your time or Prince's body, they can't withstand our slow work." Feng Zhiyao had to admit that Lang Haoyu was right. He couldn't stay in the capital for too long. Moreover, Mr. Shen also mentioned that although Prince's body might not completely lose control in 2 years due to the effects of the phoenix tail grass, it wouldn't be too long. And now, more than a year and a half had passed. Calculating their time, they could afford to wait, but Prince's body couldn't. After pondering for a long time, Feng Zhiyao said, "I need to think about this carefully." "Oh right, how is the raging flame lotus in the northern tribes?" Chapter 447. Lang Haoyu said, "Since Prince was able to walk again, I think many people think that Prince's poison has been cured. They don't pay as much attention to the raging flame lotus as before. I've already arranged for people to retrieve the raging flame lotus as soon as it matures." Feng Zhiyao nodded. "Whether it's useful or not, it's always good to prepare more. If it's too late for the sky-falling flower, Mr. Shen will definitely think of a way with the raging flame lotus." In fact, no one was too optimistic about the sky-falling flower. Not to mention the time and energy needed to find the sky-falling flower, the long-lost ancient prescription was also troublesome. Therefore, while Shen Yang was studying the sky-falling flower, he also focused on some prescriptions that could replace or temporarily restrain the poison in Prince's body. Lang Haoyu nodded seriously. Everything they were doing now was based on Prince Sting's health. If anything happened to Prince Sting, all their efforts would be in vain. This was also why the Mahist army temporarily occupied the entire northwest for so long, but the higher-ups of the Mahist army did not become more radical. Once something happened to the prince, the more they did now, the greater the blow to the Mahist army in the future. "Okay, let's do it. Just tell me how many experts you need." Lang Haoyu stood up and said. Feng Zhiyao only brought a part of the Shadow Guard and a dozen people from Qi Lin this time. Although they were all elites, there were too few of them. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Speaking of experts, the princess really gave me an expert before the king left. As long as he is obedient, it's not impossible to catch Mo Jingqi from the palace." "Oh?" Lang Haoyu asked curiously, "There's such an expert under the princess?" Feng Zhiyao smiled and said, "Mu Qingzang, one of the 4 experts in the world. Plus Qi Lin, do you think it's enough?" Lang Haoyu was stunned for a moment, then he clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Enough, it's more than enough. One of the top 4 masters in the world, plus the elusive Qi Lin. Unless Mo Jingqi's palace was impenetrable, there was no need to worry about not being able to drag him out of the palace. In the emperor's bedroom, Mo Jingqi walked in with a gloomy expression. The oppressive aura around him caused the eunuchs and palace maids behind him to lower their heads in fear, not daring to look at their master. Standing at the door, Mo Jingqi turned his head and swept a glance at the frightened crowd. He coldly and angrily said, "All of you, get out." Everyone sighed in relief and hurriedly retreated. In an instant, Mo Jingqi was the only one left in the palace. The resplendent bedchamber appeared empty and cold. Mo Jingqi stepped in and kicked over a small table with an antique vase. Then, the other things in the hall were all messed up. The palace maids and eunuchs guarding outside could only hear the clattering sounds coming from inside and knew that the emperor was smashing things again. Eunuch. The new eunuch worriedly asked the eunuch in charge. Was it really okay for the emperor to be angry like this? The eunuch in charge was clearly used to this. He calmly said, "Guard it well. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask." Yes. The eunuch nodded as if he understood. Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li. I will definitely kill you all. Inside the hall, Mo Jingqi, who had fiercely vented his anger, roared at the mess on the floor. Thinking of the news he received in the morning court, Mo Jingqi couldn't help but burn with anger. He even wanted to kill the person who delivered the letter. Yi Li gave birth to a child. Mo Xiaoyao actually dared to openly call him Prince Ding's heir. Prince Ding's position had long been removed by him. Mo Xiaoyao's actions were clearly going against him. He even openly sent out invitations to invite the nobles of various countries to Ruyang to attend Prince Ding's 1-month-old celebration. It should be known that this was an honor that even the princes of Dechu state did not have. Mo Xiaoyao wanted to tell the world that his son was more honorable than Mo Xiaoyao's prince. Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao. I didn't kill you back then. That's why I raised a tiger today. Just you wait. Reporting to Your Majesty, Prime Minister Lu requests an audience. Outside the door, the eunuch carefully reported. Mo Jingqi's eyes darkened. He coldly said, "Scram in." The door was pushed open from the outside and quickly closed. Prime Minister Lu also carefully walked in. After glancing at Mo Jingqi's face, he knelt down and said, "Your humble servant greets Your Majesty." Mo Jingqi coldly snorted and asked, "Prime Minister, what do you think of this morning's memorial?" Mo Jingqi didn't tell him to rise, so Prime Minister Lu didn't dare to rise. He raised his head and said with righteous indignation, "Your Majesty, Mo Xiaoyao's actions are really treacherous. Since last year, Mo Xiaoyao has done many treacherous things. His ambition is clear. Your Majesty has forgiven him many times, but he still does things his own way and is even more arrogant and reckless. Your Majesty, please punish him severely." Prime Minister Lu's words were obviously what Mo Jingqi wanted. He slightly trembled and nodded. "You may rise." "Prime Minister, what do you think?" Prime Minister Lu thought for a moment and saluted. Mo Xiaoyao is far away in the northwest. Even if Your Majesty wants to punish him, I'm afraid it's beyond your reach. In my humble opinion, the Ding King's mansion in the capital should be immediately sealed up to show the public. In addition, the Su family in Yunzhou is the grandfather of the Ding King's mansion. They have a lot of dealings with the Ding King's mansion. Your Majesty, please issue an edict to immediately lock up the Su family in Yunzhou and confiscate their properties. Kill one as an example to others. This. Although Mo Jingqi also disliked the Su family for a long time, he still hesitated when it came to confiscating their properties. Prime Minister Lu hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, the Su family controls the most famous Lishan Academy in Dechu State. In every imperial examination, the number of candidates from Lishan Academy is even greater. Nearly half of the officials in the court are from Lishan Academy. Once the Su family defers to Mo Xiaoyao, these officials and scholars. Prime Minister Liu didn't finish his words, but the lingering sound was enough for Mo Jingqi to think. As expected, Mo Jingqi's expression changed. He nodded. Prime Minister Liu is right. Let's leave this matter to you. Remember, don't let the people criticize you. Prime Minister Liu smiled. Your Majesty, don't worry. The relationship between the Su family and Mo Xiaoyao is known to the world. Now that Mo Xiaoyao has acted against the Su family can't get away with it. Mo Jingqi nodded with satisfaction. Very good. Prime Minister, you may leave. Your Majesty, please excuse me. Seeing Prime Minister Liu leave, Mo Jingqi's mood was obviously much better. He couldn't wait to see what expression Mo Xiaoyao would have when he arrested the Su family. It was a pity that he couldn't see it in person. It was really a pity. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in the back of his neck. Mo Jingqi's vision turned black, and he immediately fell into darkness. When Mo Jingqi came back to his senses, he found that he was not in the splendid bedchamber, but in an empty room. There was nothing in the room, not even a piece of furniture except the chair he was sitting on. He couldn't tell where he was at all. But there was one thing that Mo Jingqi was sure of. He was kidnapped, and now he was definitely not in the imperial palace. Mo Jingqi's heart sank. He looked down at the rope that trapped him in the chair and struggled in vain. Guards! Someone come quickly. Who dares to be so bold? Come out. Chapter 448. With a creak, the door was pushed open. Mo Jingqi's back was to the door and he could not see anything, but he could sense that someone had entered. He shouted harshly, "How dare you kidnap me? Quickly untie me. I'll spare your lives." This young master is so scared. A cold and mocking laugh came from behind him. Mo Jingqi turned to look. There were 3 men dressed in black standing behind him. They were dressed in black from head to toe. Even their faces were covered, only revealing a pair of eyes. Mo Jingqi looked again and again, but he realized that he could not tell if these people were people he knew or not. Who are you? Do you know what the crime of kidnapping me is? Mo Jingqi asked harshly. Feng Zhiyao narrowed his eyes at the man dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe. He was not bad looking. The Mo family members were all good looking. However, the aura between his brows was far from Prince Ding's. Even though he pretended to be calm, Feng Zhiyao could still see the fear in his eyes. He smiled thoughtfully. It was good that he was afraid. What is the crime of kidnapping the emperor? Feng Zhiyao smiled wholeheartedly at Mo Jingqi, asking, "Does the Chu state have a crime of kidnapping the emperor?" Mo Jingqi was speechless. Of course, the Chu state did not have such a crime, because no one would dare to kidnap the emperor. Impudent! Feng Zhiyao laughed coldly. He leaned over and placed his elbow on the back of the chair, looking down at Mo Jingqi with a smile. Since we've invited the emperor here, we naturally know the consequences. So, it's best if your majesty does not waste words. Otherwise. A small dagger suddenly appeared in his empty fingers. Feng Zhiyao carelessly slid the tip of the dagger around Mo Jingqi's neck. The cold and sharp blade immediately caused goosebumps to appear on Mo Jingqi's neck. What do you want? Lang Haoyu, who was leaning against the wall, smiled. Actually, it's nothing much. We just want to borrow something from your majesty. His majesty is rich, surely he won't be so stingy. Although Ling Haoyu's words sounded very gentle, it was impossible to ignore the threat in them. Mo Jingqi quickly glanced at the knife on his neck and asked, "What do you want?" "Azure falling flower," Feng Zhiyao whispered. Mo Jingqi was startled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "What by Luo's words?" Feng Zhiyao smiled coldly and said, "I've heard that Bai Luo's words can revive the dead. I just don't know if the Bai Luo flower can be saved if I stab it down." There was a slight pain on his neck. Mo Jingqi felt something flowing down his neck. It was his blood. His heart trembling, Mo Jingqi hurriedly called out, "Wait. The blue jade falling flower has been lost for more than 100 years. Who told you that we have the blue jade falling flower?" Feng Zhiyao smiled and said, "There is no harm in telling the emperor this. There is a young master named Tan Jiji. I wonder if your majesty knows him." Mo Jingqi was stunned. Tan Jiji. If it was someone else, he might be able to deny it. However, Tan Jiji naturally knew him because he was the one who had given it to him. He thought that Tan Jiji had been killed by Mo Xiaoyao. Could it be? "You're Mo Xiaoyao's men." As though reading his thoughts, Feng Zhiyao smiled coldly. "Your Majesty, don't waste your time. There are many people who know that the treasure is in your Majesty's hands. Tan Jiji is still alive and is currently in the Chu capital. He's in your hands." Feng Zhiyao shook his head. "Although we're also looking for him, it's enough to know the whereabouts of the Bai Luo flower. It seems that young Master Tan isn't that loyal to your Majesty. According to what this one knows, young Master Tan had already reneged on returning to the capital 2 months ago. Does your Majesty not know?" Mo Jingqi cursed inwardly. He really didn't know. Originally, he thought that Mo Xiaoyao must have secretly killed Tan Jiji. Now, it seemed that Mo Xiaoyao had truly let him go. He was the one who refused to return. Needless to say, he must have betrayed him. Thinking of this, Mo Jingqi's heart tightened. Tan Jiji had betrayed him. Did that mean that Mo Xiaoyao already knew about that matter? "I really admire your Majesty. You can still be in a daze at a time like this." Feng Zhiyao smiled. "Speak, the whereabouts of the Bai Luo flower or your Majesty's life. Even if you kill me, you can forget about escaping from the capital." Mo Jingqi said angrily. Feng Zhiyao smiled. "Who told you that we're in the capital right now? Even if I kill the emperor, I can still swagger into the capital and find a place to stay. The Bai Luo flower is in the palace. This one can slowly search for it. Since your Majesty is so stubborn, it seems that our Dechu state needs a new emperor to ascend the throne." After speaking, without any hesitation, he raised the dagger in his hand and stabbed towards Mo Jingqi's neck. "Wait!" Mo Jingqi cried out in shock. Seeing the dagger dangerously close to his neck, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. "I'll speak." Mo Jingqi's face had long turned pale, his eyes filled with fear. "The Bai Luo flower is in the Empress Palace." Feng Zhiyao was startled. His phoenix eyes narrowed as he coldly said, "You would place that kind of treasure in the Empress Palace?" Mo Jingqi said, "It's precisely because it's a treasure that it's not eye-catching in the Empress Palace. The Bai Luo flower's appearance is like jade. 8 years ago, we decorated it and gave it to the Empress as a gift, ordering her to keep it well. That's why she definitely wouldn't use the Bai Luo flower for herself or give it to others." Feng Zhiyao stood up, saying, "You better be telling the truth. We're not lying. When will you let us go?" Feng Zhiyao walked towards the door. "As long as we get the item, we can let you go at any time. But if there's any problem with the item, your Majesty knows the consequences." Mo Jingqi said dejectedly, "We know. It was definitely not a small matter for the emperor of a country to go missing in the palace in broad daylight. Needless to say, the entire capital and the imperial palace were under martial law, searching door to door. Those in the palace who knew the inside story were even more alarmed. The Empress Dowager, who had long been enjoying her life in the imperial harem and did not care about worldly affairs, also came out. The Empress and noble consort Lu were also present. The commander of the imperial guards, the chief eunuch, and Prime Minister Lu, who had been summoned by the emperor, all knelt on the ground. The Empress Dowager's face darkened as she angrily rebuked, "It's been half a day, and the emperor has suddenly disappeared. What are you people doing? What's the use of the imperial family keeping you?" No one dared to refute and could only beg for mercy. Among them, Prime Minister Lu felt that he was the most innocent. He had only asked to see the emperor to discuss some matters. What did the emperor's disappearance have to do with him? It was only because he was the last person the emperor saw before he disappeared. Naturally, he couldn't escape being dry-cleaned. Investigate carefully for Ijia. You must bring the emperor back safely. As for your lives, wait until the emperor comes back. The Empress Dowager ordered coldly. Everyone nodded in agreement. After venting her anger, the Empress Dowager looked at Prime Minister Lu, who was kneeling on the ground, and asked, "Prime Minister, what did the emperor say to you when he last saw you?" Prime Minister Lu said, "Empress Dowager, they just discussed some affairs of the imperial court. There was nothing special." How could the Empress Dowager not see that Prime Minister Lu was perfunctory? Her eyes darkened as she said coldly, "Tell me the details." Prime Minister Lu hesitated for a moment and said, "Because of what happened in the morning court, the emperor was furious, but he didn't say anything important. He only said that they would discuss it tomorrow morning." It was not that Prime Minister Lu wanted to hide anything from the Empress Dowager, but the punishment of the Su family was top secret. As long as the emperor hadn't given an order, it couldn't be disclosed. Otherwise, the Lu family would be in trouble. Chapter 449. The Empress Dowager looked at Prime Minister Lu suspiciously. Prime Minister Lu just let her look at him calmly and sincerely. As an old fox who had been in the court all his life, how could he let others see through him when he really wanted to hide something? In the end, the Empress Dowager just waved the crowd away with annoyance. Seeing everyone leave, the mammy beside the Empress Dowager asked carefully, "Your Highness, what do you think about the emperor?" The Empress Dowager closed her eyes to rest and said lightly, "I have already retired to the imperial harem. I don't have the time to care so much. The Empress and the courtiers will take care of these things." "Where is Prince Li now?" The mammy whispered. After Prince Li and the emperor agreed to stop the war, he promised to come back to the capital this year to celebrate the Empress Dowager's birthday. Prince Li should be on his way now. The Empress Dowager nodded, "Very good. Send a message to Prince Li and ask him to come to the capital as soon as possible." In addition, the one Prince Li left in the capital, called Ying, "Isn't she pregnant?" The mammy nodded, "You are right. Concubine Yi gave birth to a son for Prince Li. Now the child is almost 1 year old. Send someone to take care of her." The Empress Dowager ordered and waved her hand to let the mammy leave. Thinking of her 2 sons, the Empress Dowager's face darkened. Others said that she was lucky. In the former emperor's imperial harem, she was the only one who gave birth to 2 children. Her eldest son even became the emperor of a country, and she became the Empress Dowager because of her son. However, no one knew that her eldest son was suspicious by nature. Even his mother was on guard against her, fearing that she would threaten him with her power. If not, she could be the Empress Dowager peacefully. Why would she scheme against the emperor together with her youngest son? These years, she seemed to be very honorable in the imperial harem, but in fact, she was just good-looking. The emperor could contradict her from time to time for a favorite concubine. She could not get any power in the imperial harem. How could the empress dowager, who had been scheming against each other all her life and thought that she could live a smooth life from now on, be reconciled? After saying goodbye to concubine Lu, the empress returned to her palace. Her calm face showed a trace of worry and confusion. The empress waved her hand to let the mamas and maids behind her leave. Then she pushed the door open and walked into her bedroom. The empress walked into the room and looked at the quiet room in front of her. She walked to the table and sat down. Then, she said faintly, "Come out." After a while, Feng Zhiyao walked out from behind the curtain of the phoenix bed and looked at her quietly. The empress frowned slightly, but Feng Zhiyao didn't wait for her to speak. He opened his mouth and said, "I came to take something, I'll leave immediately." The empress was startled, she didn't understand and asked, "Take what?" Feng Zhiyao said, "Mo Jingqi gave you a white jade box 8 years ago for safekeeping." The empress pondered for a moment, then raised her head to look at him and said, "Was it you who captured the emperor?" "Yes," Feng Zhiyao admitted. "Do you want to call someone to arrest me?" The empress stood up and walked quickly to him. "Kidnapping the ruler of a country? Aren't you a little too daring? Now that the capital and the imperial palace have been completely sealed off, let's see how you're going to deal with the aftermath." Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "If I can enter, then I can naturally leave. Not to mention, Mo Jingqi's life is still in my hands." The empress angrily glared at him. She shook her head and said, "After following Prince Ding for so many years, haven't you used your brain? Do you think that everyone really wants the emperor to come back safely? I'm afraid that there are many people who want you to kill him." "I really want to kill him," Feng Zhiyao said hatefully. "Nonsense." The empress reprimanded in a low voice, "Kidnapping the emperor definitely wasn't Prince Ding's idea. What did you come back to do this time?" Feng Zhiyao paused before saying, "I'm following Wang Fei's orders to take the blue jade falling flower." Blue jade falling flower. The empress frowned. She didn't know much about medicine, so naturally she didn't know what the blue jade falling flower was for. She looked at Feng Zhiyao in annoyance and said, "For Princess Ding to send you back, it must be something important. Can't I help you find it when you send someone to send a message? Are you only happy now that you've made such a big fuss?" Feng Zhiyao gave a light snort and said, "If we don't make such a big fuss, no one will be able to find it. Mo Jingqi places great importance on the blue jade falling flower. All these years, even the person who gave it to him and his most trusted concubine Lu didn't know about it. Why would he tell you? Not to mention that if he found out that you were searching for the blue jade falling flower, you wouldn't be able to escape responsibility." The empress gave a helpless sigh and asked, "So you already know where the blue jade falling flower is?" Feng Zhiyao nodded. "Mo Jingqi said that he gave it to you half a year ago. Do you still remember a white jade box?" The empress lowered her head and thought for a moment. She nodded and said, "I remember now. Wait a moment." She turned and walked into the room. Not long after, the empress came out holding a beautifully carved white jade box. She put the white jade box into Feng Zhiyao's hands and asked, "Is this?" Feng Zhiyao took the box and carefully opened it. Inside, there was a light green flower that looked like a peony. It looked like jade, but when one reached out to touch the flower petals, they could clearly feel its softness and a faint strange fragrance. This flower had been picked for a long time, but it didn't show any signs of withering. It was like a jade flower. Feng Zhiyao compared the general appearance and color of the blue jade falling flower that Mr. Qin had told him. He concluded that the white jade box in front of him really did contain the legendary blue jade falling flower. The empress said in a low voice, "Take it away. Release the emperor as soon as possible and then return to the northwest." Feng Zhiyao put away the box and looked deeply at the empress. He said, "You really want to stay in the palace forever?" The Empress gave a faint smile and said, "If I don't stay in the palace forever, where can I go? Go quickly and be careful." Feng Zhiyao stared at her. "You're not afraid that I'll kill Mo Jingqi?" The Empress shook her head and gave a faint smile. "You won't do that. If the Emperor dies now, it won't be good for the Prince Ding mansion." Even though no one has said anything yet, there must be a lot of people in the court who suspect the Prince Ding mansion. If the Emperor really doesn't come back, it doesn't matter if the Prince Ding mansion did it or not. In the end, those people will still push the blame onto Prince Ding. Feng Zhiyao gave a dissatisfied grunt, but he couldn't deny that what the Empress said was true. He turned and said, "I'm leaving." The Empress nodded, "Be careful on the way." Feng Zhiyao walked a few steps and then turned back with a smile. "Do you know what your Emperor did? He wants to destroy the Su family." The Empress froze. When she came back to her senses, Feng Zhiyao had already disappeared. She could only sigh softly, and a bitter smile appeared on her beautiful face. With Mu Qingzang secretly escorting them, Feng Zhiyao was also an expert. Even though the palace was heavily guarded, they still walked out without any danger. The two returned to the place where they hid Mo Jingqi. Leng Haoyu was sitting in the room, staring at Mo Jingqi while waiting for news. Seeing them come in, Leng Haoyu quickly got up and asked, "Did you get the thing?" Feng Zhiyao raised the box in his hand and said, "I got it, but whether it's real or not, the Emperor has to personally confirm it." Chapter 450. Mo Jingqi's face was gloomy as he said, "You've already taken the item, what else do you want?" Feng Zhiyao smiled and said, "I'm a very suspicious person. I heard that this jade falling flower is not only a miraculous elixir, but also a miraculous medicine for treating injuries. Just a little bit of it can immediately heal a wound. I wonder if that's true." Mo Jingqi was stunned. He stared closely at the dagger in Feng Zhiyao's hand and said, "What do you want to do?" Feng Zhiyao revealed a malicious smile at him and said, "Of course it's to ask your majesty to try the effects of this jade falling flower. We spent so much effort to get this item. If it turns out to be a fake, wouldn't we become a laughingstock?" Mo Jingqi gritted his teeth and said, "We guarantee that it's true." Feng Zhiyao shook his head and said, "Your majesty's guarantee is worthless." The subordinate did not hesitate to stab Mo Jingqi's shoulder with the dagger. Mo Jingqi let out a blood-curdling scream, and blood immediately flowed out. Feng Zhiyao's eyes flashed with a trace of pleasure. He happily used the dagger to gesture at the jade falling flower in the white jade box and said, "How do we use this?" It said that it's a powder that needs to be scraped off with a knife. Such a beautiful flower is worthless if it's scraped off. Just try scraping off the bottom. Mo Jingqi quickly said, "You can't use a dagger. The jade falling flower must be preserved in a jade box to not lose its medicinal properties. Similarly, it must be cut with a jade knife." "Oh, thank you for your advice." Feng Zhiyao flipped his hand and put away the dagger. He also put the jade falling flower back into the box and said to Leng Haoyu, "Do you have any golden sore medicine? Give him some." Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows. He silently took out the golden sore medicine and casually sprinkled some on Mo Jingqi's wound. Mo Jingqi's face was pale from the pain. He glared fiercely at Feng Zhiyao and said, "We definitely won't let you off." Feng Zhiyao sneered, "If you have the time to threaten us, you might as well think about how you're going to return to the capital. As far as I know, there are a lot of people who don't go back like you." It was said that the Empress Dowager had already sent a message to Prince Li, asking him to hurry to the capital. It seems that our emperor is also someone who is not loved by his parents. Mo Jingqi was hit where it hurt, but he couldn't do anything about it. Feng Zhiyao had no interest in paying attention to Mo Jingqi's feelings. He put away the Biluo flower in satisfaction and raised his chin towards Leng Haoyu. I'll leave him to you. There's no need to send them back in a hurry, lest we cause trouble before we leave. Leng Haoyu smiled and said, Are you worried about me? Go about your business. Feng Zhiyao nodded. He glanced at Imo Jingqi and said with a smile, Seeing that the emperor is so cooperative, how about I give you a piece of information for free? Imo Jingqi looked at him coldly, clearly not believing that he would be kind enough to give him any information. Feng Zhiyao didn't mind and said with a smile, It's information about the emperor's trusted aide, Lord Tan. It is said that Lord Tan's surname is Lin, and his name is Yuan. He is the descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family. Your Majesty, can you guess what Lin Yuan's Yuan is? It can't be that he wishes for the emperor's longevity and unparalleled fortune, right? After saying this, Feng Zhiyao laughed loudly and turned to leave, leaving behind Imo Jingqi whose face was green and white. Feng Zhiyao took the Biluo flower and went to the place Su Zuodi had told him before she died to retrieve the imperial edict left behind by Emperor Taizu. Then, he silently disappeared from the capital. Other than those close to him, outsiders didn't even know that Feng Zhiyao had returned to the capital. Leng Haoyu didn't stand on ceremony and locked Imo Jingqi in a small dark room for 3 whole days. On the 4th day, when he heard that Prince Li was about to enter the capital, he ordered someone to cover the unconscious Imo Jingqi in a cloth bag and threw him out of the city gates while it was still stuffy in the morning. From beginning to end, Imo Jingqi didn't even know where he was tied up. Whether it was Feng Zhiyao, Leng Haoyu, or Mu Qingzang, Imo Jingqi clearly couldn't remember them. So this time, he suffered a loss for nothing. Under everyone's strange gazes, Imo Jingqi angrily returned to the palace. He didn't care about the concubines and courtiers who came to greet him and angrily issued several imperial edicts. First, arrest the rebels who dared to kidnap him, regardless of whether they died or were injured. Instead, thoroughly investigate all the courtiers who were close to Tan Jiji, as well as Tan Jiji's movements over the years, and arrest Tan Jiji. Third, search the capital's imperial censor manor, the Su family, Yunzhou Su family, and Mount Li. Immediately lock up imperial censor Su's family and throw them into prison. The first 2 imperial edicts were reasonable, but the third one poked a hornet's nest. Prime Minister Liu took the imperial edict and just walked out of the palace gates with the officials and guards who searched the family, only to see the palace gates in an uproar. Hundreds of scholars knelt on the ground and cried out for the Su family in unison. Prime Minister Liu looked around and found that there were many people who were already officials in the imperial court. Prime Minister Liu knew that the Su family was the head of the scholars in the world, but he didn't expect that they would be so popular. The emperor's edict was issued less than an hour ago, and so many people were kneeling in front of the gate. If a few more hours passed, who knew what would happen? He couldn't help but feel jealous and resentful. Unfolding the imperial edict in his hand, Prime Minister Liu read it at the gate of the palace. However, the emperor's golden rule couldn't make these scholars bury it, and they all refuted it. In fact, it was not that these scholars were fickle, but that the emperor's edict was really difficult to convince the public. It didn't clearly state what the Su family had done, nor did it say who had done it. Originally, it didn't matter whether the emperor's edict could convince the public, because not many people dared to issue the emperor's edict. But the bad thing was that the Su family's influence was too great. The Su family had produced many great scholars in the past generations. Although they couldn't be called great teachers, they could be said to be the teachers of most scholars since the founding of the Chu state. However, scholars were a kind of very strange people. They seemed to be very weak and couldn't be lifted or carried, but sometimes the pride in their bones was surprisingly strong and stubborn. Seeing so many people kneeling in front of the palace gates, Prime Minister Liu knew that things were going to go wrong. The guards behind Prime Minister Liu also couldn't do anything. Of course, it was easy for them to deal with these scholars with their skills, but these people were not people they could casually deal with. Without the emperor's golden rule, who dared to touch so many scholars? At that time, half of the sky of Dechu state would be turned upside down. Looking at the people kneeling and kowtowing, Prime Minister Liu had no choice but to send people back to the palace to report to the emperor. Hearing the guard's report, Mo Jingqi was so angry that he almost fainted. Ignoring the injury on his shoulder, he hurried to the palace gates with noble consort Liu. People in the world were divided into scholars, farmers, businessmen, and scholars were the first. To put it bluntly, the country was governed by these scholars. If something happened to this group of people, the country wouldn't be far from being destroyed. When Mo Jingqi arrived at the palace gates, it was only half an hour, but the people at the palace gates had more than doubled from the hundreds just now, and it seemed that more people were joining in. Seeing the emperor come out, the people kneeling in front of him became more excited. They all shouted, asking the emperor to be merciful, asking the emperor to judge clearly, saying that the Su family was wronged, and so on. Mo Jingqi's weak body, which had been frightened these days, was now dizzy. Chapter 451. What is going on? Mo Jingqi demanded angrily. A young man kneeling at the front of the group said in a loud voice, "Since the founding of Great Chu, the Su clan has served Great Chu loyally, and the ancestors of Su clan have taught and educated the people, and have done their best to cultivate talents for Great Chu. May I ask your majesty, what crime did the Su family commit to have their entire family confiscated?" Mo Jingqi choked, the anger in his heart growing. The Su family plotted rebellion, and their crimes are punishable by death. As citizens of Dechu state, you actually dare to plead for mercy for these traitors. Another person in the crowd raised his head. Where is the evidence of the Su family's rebellion? Please instruct us, your majesty. Hearing this, the people kneeling at the palace gates all shouted, "Please instruct us, your majesty." Their meaning was clear. If the emperor could really produce evidence of the Su family's rebellion, then they would have nothing to say. What evidence did Mo Jingqi have? Even at the start, he did not accuse the Su family of rebellion. However, after the disturbance caused by these scholars, Mo Jingqi's anger soared. How could he care about anything else? He could only pin the most serious crime on the Su family. Furthermore, if the Su family was said to have colluded with Prince Ding, the Prince Ding mansion's reputation among the people was not inferior to the Su family's. When the time came, there would only be trouble. Impudent! All of you, quickly retreat. We will forgive your sins. Mo Jingqi said. The Su family is innocent, your majesty, please judge clearly. These people dared to beg for mercy at the palace gates. How could they be dismissed with just a few words from Mo Jingqi? The palace gates were in an uproar. Even many commoners had heard the news and came over, surrounding the palace gates so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. As a result, it was even harder to take action. Your Majesty! What crime did the Su family commit? Does your Majesty want to confiscate the Su family? Just as they were making a ruckus, a loud voice suddenly rang out, and the crowd parted to make a path. The white-haired old Duke Hua led a group of people and walked forward in a grandiose manner. Mo Jingqi's face was as black as ink. He stared at the majestic old Duke Hua, cursing in his heart. Duke Hua stepped forward, lifted the hem of his robes, and knelt on the ground. The Su family is loyal and righteous, and Mr. Qingyun's name has spread far and wide. What crime has Su Shi committed to make your Majesty so angry? Would your Majesty please explain? Following behind him were some of the top officials in the court. There were even some members of the imperial clan and some old ministers of the former emperor who had been idle at home. They were all people who had a good relationship with Mr. Qingyun and the Su family. They all echoed in unison, wanting the emperor to give them a clear answer. Mo Jingqi angrily attacked. The Su family rebelled. Du Qua, are you going to protect these traitors? Du Qua raised his head and said in a clear voice, if Lady Su is truly plotting rebellion, this old man is willing to be a pawn and personally take away the lock, allowing the emperor to punish me. But your majesty, may I ask where is the evidence? Mo Jingqi said, the Su family is the maternal grandfather of Mo Xiuyao's wife, Yili. Mo Xiuyao is currently occupying the northwest and is clearly going against the court. Could it be that the Su family shouldn't be seized? Du Qua did not back down at all, saying in a clear voice, whether Prince Ding is going against the court is still unknown. Everyone can clearly see that the Su family has never had close relations with the Prince Ding mansion, nor have they said a single good word for Prince Ding. Just because of Prince Ding, Your Majesty wants to seize the Su family who has not nurtured countless talents for the Dechu state. It is truly difficult to convince the public. Du Qua, you're impudent. Mo Jingqi's chest heaved up and down. He pointed at Du Qua, unable to speak for a long time. Noble consort Lu, who was standing to the side, hurriedly reached out to support him. Mo Jingqi took a few deep breaths and was about to speak. Suddenly, the sharp voice of an eunuch came from the palace gates. The Empress Dowager has arrived. The Empress has arrived. Before he had time to look back, a loud voice came from the other end of the street. Great Elder Princess Fu Shi has arrived. Great Elder Princess Xiaoyang has arrived. As if God didn't think Mo Jingqi was busy enough, when he saw the carriages of Great Elder Princess Fu Shi and Great Elder Princess Xiaoyang coming slowly, the sound of horse hooves came from another street. The suspect was Prince Li, Mo Jingli, who had not returned to the capital for a long time. Mo Jingli flew off the horse and walked quickly to the gate of the palace with his men. He actually arrived earlier than Great Elder Princess. Greetings, Royal Brother. Greetings, Royal Mother. After saluting, Mo Jingli stood up and said with a smile, why is it so lively at the gate of the palace? What are Royal Brother, Royal Mother, Royal Sister-in-law and so many people doing? Mo Jingqi looked gloomily at Mo Jingli, who was obviously in high spirits. Although he had to reconcile with his younger brother for many reasons, it didn't mean that Mo Jingqi had really forgotten Mo Jingli's rebellious behavior. Even now, his good younger brother was still involved in a large area south of the Yunlan River. Ignoring Mo Jingli, Mo Jingqi could only look at the Empress Dowager, the Empress, and Great Elder Princess Fu Shi and Great Elder Princess Xiaoyang who had just got off the carriage and walked to the gate of the palace. He said lightly, Royal Mother, Empress, why are you here? Before the Empress Dowager spoke, the Empress came to the front, knelt on the ground, and said in a low voice, the Su family of Yunzhou is loyal to the Dechu state. Your Majesty, please reconsider. There were several concubines beside the Empress. Although they were not favored, they were virtuous women from scholarly families. They also knelt down and said in unison, Your Majesty, please reconsider. Mo Jingqi's face darkened. Before he said anything, Great Elder Princess Fu Shi and Great Elder Princess Xiaoyang had come to the front. Great Elder Princess pushed away the palace maid who was supporting her, knelt down beside the Empress, and said, What crime did the Su family commit? Your Majesty, why do you want to confiscate the Su family? Your Majesty, please tell us. Great Elder Princess Xiaoyang didn't say anything, but directly knelt beside Great Elder Princess. It was obvious that what Great Elder Princess said was what she wanted to say. You. Mo Jingqi was almost trembling with anger. But Great Elder Princess Fu Shi was a senior, so he couldn't let her kneel at the gate of the palace. He hurriedly asked the palace maid beside him to help her up, and said, Your Majesty, let's go back to the palace and talk about it. Why did you come back to the capital city? Great Elder Princess didn't appreciate his kindness, and said lightly, "I'm old and useless, so I don't dare to expect your majesty to listen to the advice of old people like us. But the Su family has really made great contributions to the Dechu state. Not to mention that they didn't do anything wrong. Even if they did, your majesty should punish them lightly. Although I'm old and muddle-headed, I still want to beg your majesty. Please investigate the Su family clearly." Great Elder Princess's words made Mo Jingqi so angry that he almost fainted, but he was still speechless. Looking at the increasing number of scholars, officials, and even ordinary people gathering in front of the palace gate, Mo Jingqi only felt that he was going to faint, and he was afraid that today's matter would be difficult to be settled. Mo Jingli, who was standing beside him, was in a surprisingly good mood. At that time, he took the risk of rebelling. Although he only lived in most of the regions south of the Yangtze River temporarily, he was much better than before. It was said that Mo Jingli was the younger brother of the current emperor, who was doted on and respected by the emperor. But with his emperor brother's temperament, how could he really give him power? In the capital city, he was just a little better looking than other princes. But now, he occupied the prosperous regions south of the Yangtze River. Even if his emperor brother was furious, he couldn't do anything to him. Speaking of which, Mo Xiaoyao did him a big favor. If it weren't for the fact that Mo Xiaoyao now occupied the northwest and made his emperor brother extremely afraid, he couldn't return to the capital city so openly. At this time, seeing Mo Jingqi's angry face, Mo Jingli didn't show it on his face, but he was very happy in his heart. If the emperor really did confiscate the Su family, he was afraid that the Dechu state would really fall into chaos. Mo Jingqi was stunned for a moment before an idea flashed through his mind. He shouted, "Stop the Empress!" Everyone was stunned, but they saw that the Empress did not move at all. She just stood there and looked at the emperor helplessly. The Empress sighed faintly in her heart. Did the emperor think that she was also going to die to persuade him? As the Empress, she was also the emperor's wife. How could she let the emperor bear the crime of forcing his wife and the Empress to death? Mo Jingqi stared at the Empress in a daze, and his face turned pale. On the other side, Great Elder Princess was not so polite. She said coldly, "Since your majesty said so, please lock me up as well. I am willing to share the same crime as Su." With Great Elder Princess taking the lead, the people behind also shouted, "We are willing to share the same crime as Su." In an attic not far from the palace gate, the half-closed window could see the scene at the palace gate in the distance, but the people outside could not see the people inside. The noise outside the palace gate naturally spread into the attic. By the window, Ling Haoyu held a wine cup and leaned against the window lazily to drink. The man sitting opposite him was dressed in white, handsome and elegant. His eyebrows were slightly raised, and only bloomed with a pure lotus-like elegance, like an immortal. Who else could it be but Su Qingchen? When Su Qingchen knew that Yili had returned safely and was pregnant, he knew that there would be an accident in the future, and the Su family could not easily get out of it. Therefore, he rushed to Yunzhou as soon as possible after dealing with the affairs in the south. After returning to Yunzhou, he had a deep talk with his grandfather and father, and then rushed to the capital. He happened to see such a good show. Ling Haoyu looked at young Master Qingchen, and there was a little more appreciation in his eyes. In Ling Haoyu's opinion, among the 5 young masters of the Su family, only young Master Qingchen was the most similar to the princess. Usually, he was amiable and gentle to others, but when it was time to fight, he was fierce and never soft-hearted. In such a situation, what do you think Mo Jingqi will do? Ling Haoyu was a martial artist, and his eyesight was naturally better than ordinary people. He clearly saw Mo Jingqi's expression and face outside the palace gate. Su Qingchen on the opposite side only held a cup of tea, looked leisurely and calm, and said with a faint smile, "Mo Jingqi is cruel and merciless, but he lacks courage. No matter who set up the trap today, he can't solve it. If he killed a few people in the beginning, the people behind him would naturally stop. If he didn't hesitate to kill Mo Jingli, how could Prince Li have the power today? 10 years ago, if he didn't hesitate to kill Prince Ding, how could there be today's situation? With such a temperament, even in peaceful times, he can't be called a monarch, let alone now that chaos is coming. He can only be played in the hands of others. Leng Haoyu's heart was slightly cold, and he looked at the handsome man in front of him in awe. Young Master Qingchen's talent was well known in the world, and he was famous for being extraordinary, but he didn't expect to say such sarcastic and sharp words. Nodding in agreement with Su Qingchen's point of view, Leng Haoyu turned his gaze to the city gate again. His eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, "The good show is coming." The palace gate was in a deadlock when a clear and steady voice came from not far away. "This subject, Su Hongyan, greets the emperor." Everyone turned their heads and saw that Su Hongyan wasn't wearing his official robe, but a white cloth robe as he strode over. 2 steps behind him was Su Qingbai, who was also dressed in cloth robes. Seeing him, many people called out, "Lord Su is here." Although Su Hongyan's reputation wasn't as good as his father and brothers, he was still a famous talent in Dechu State. It was just that he was trapped in the capital when he was young, and he was an imperial censor without any real power. Naturally, he wasn't as good as his father and brother who taught students in Yunzhou. Su Hongyan walked to the palace gate and bowed respectfully to Mo Jingqi and the others, saying, "This subject, Su Hongyan, greets the emperor, Empress Dowager, and Empress Dowager." Su Qingbai followed behind and bowed. The Sunshine eldest princess frowned and said, "Lord Su, why are you here?" Su Hongyan smiled faintly and said, reporting to the princess, "Because of the Su family's matter, how could this subject not know about it? I've troubled the princess and everyone to plead leniency for the Su family. Hongyan has ridden here. Also, elderly." Looking at the old man's corpse at the foot of the palace wall, Su Hongyan let out a long sigh, the corners of his eyes red. He bowed deeply to the old man's corpse and said, "The Su family has received Elder Li's great kindness, and there's nothing we can do to repay it." After doing this, Su Hongyan turned to the people kneeling behind him and said, "Many thanks to everyone for pleading on behalf of the Su family, but this is the Su family's family matter, and we shouldn't implicate everyone because of the Su family's mistake. Please return. Su Hongyan is here, respectfully awaiting your Majesty's decree." Su Qingbai, who was kneeling beside him, also said, "The Su family's 4th son, Su Qingbai, is here." Chapter 453. Mo Jingqi sneered, stared at them and said, "So, you two plead guilty." Su Qingbai smiled faintly and said, "If the emperor wants me to die, I should die. His Majesty wants to exterminate the Su family. How dare the Su family not respect him? But what crime do you want us to plead guilty to, Your Majesty?" Su Qingbai and Su Hongyan's behavior left a better impression on the people present, and at the same time, they were more dissatisfied with the emperor. Mo Jingqi obviously felt that the ministers and relatives kneeling on the ground were dissatisfied with him. If he didn't act like this, something bad might happen today. He closed his eyes, suppressed the anger in his heart, and said, "Send Su Hongyan and Su Qingbai back to the censor's mansion. Without my order, no one is allowed to see them." After that, he turned around and walked into the palace gate, ignoring the reactions of the crowd. Mo Jingqi seemed to leave in anger, but in fact, he had suffered a lot these days. In addition, he was very angry today. If he didn't leave now, he might not be able to hold on. Prime Minister Liu, who was standing aside, waved his hand and asked people to take Su Hongyan and Su Qingbai back to the censor's mansion. Although the Su family was not exterminated today, it was inevitable that the Su family would fall out with the imperial court, and the Lu family would become the first aristocratic family in the Chu state soon. Su Hongyan and Su Qingbai thanked the people kneeling on the ground again before they were taken away. The people in front of the palace gate also dispersed. Seeing this scene, Mo Jingli smiled thoughtfully and followed the Empress Dowager into the palace. Zhaoyang Princess looked at the palace gate that gradually quieted down and sighed helplessly. She looked at Great Elder Princess beside her and said, "Imperial Aunt." Great Elder Princess shook her head, and her old face looked a little tired. She held Zhaoyang Princess's hand and said, "His Majesty is confused." "Well, Zhaoyang, stay with me for a few days." Zhaoyang Princess said with a smile, "There are few people in Zhaoyang Mansion. I'm glad that you don't mind." She helped Zhaoyang Princess into the carriage, and then the two carriages went out of the city one after another. Lang Haoyu, who was sitting upstairs and watching the show, chuckled and said, "Young Master Qingchen is wise. Lord Su leaving like this is much better than leaving directly before." Not only did this strike a blow to Mo Jingqi, it also didn't damage the Su family's reputation. Now, it was the royal family who had let down the Su family, not the Su family who had let down the royal family. Su Qingchen stood up and glanced at the empty palace gate. She smiled faintly and said, "I just need to put on one more show and I can leave the capital." Lang Haoyu said, "How did young Master Qingchen know that Mo Jingqi would make a move? What if he doesn't make a move? Do we have to put on a show ourselves?" Su Qingchen lowered his head and sipped his tea. He smiled and said, "There's no need. Even if Mo Jingqi doesn't make a move, someone else will." On the other hand, Mo Jingqi naturally flew into a rage when he returned to the palace. In front of everyone in the palace, he mercilessly reprimanded the concubines who had knelt and begged with the empress. Just as he was about to banish them to the cold palace, he heard the empress step forward and say, "Today's matter was started by Qinxie. If your majesty wants to punish Qinxie, then punish Qinxie as well." Mo Jingqi was angry. He had always been on guard against this empress and didn't dote on her. However, she was still the wife bestowed to him by his imperial father. Before he ascended the throne, they had supported each other for a period of time. Therefore, he had always given her enough respect. Hearing the empress say this, Mo Jingqi sneered and said, "You still know that you are Xin's empress. You want to embarrass Xin in front of all the people in the capital?" The empress lowered her eyes and calmly said, "The Su family can't be compared to other families. They are closely related to the Chu state. If the Su family really has the intention to rebel, Qinxie won't dare to object to any of your majesty's decisions. But your majesty, does the Su family have such intentions?" Mo Jingqi choked. Facing the empress' calm and bright eyes, he couldn't say anything. After a long time, he angrily waved his hand and said, "Everyone else, scram. As for the empress, stay in your palace and don't come out. Leave the matters of the inner palace to concubine Lu." The empress didn't object. She stood and said, "Many thanks to your majesty. Qinxie will leave. My sisters, come with I." The concubines naturally wanted this. Today, they had volunteered to follow the empress to ask for the Su family's life. Just now, the empress had saved them, so they were even more grateful to the empress. They weren't favored in the palace to begin with, so they naturally didn't have any expectations for the emperor. Watching the empress leave with her people, Mo Jingqi waved his hand and smashed an antique porcelain on the table to pieces. An eunuch reported from outside the door, "Reporting to your majesty, Li Wang requests an audience." "Tell him to scram." Mo Jingqi angrily roared. Concubine Lu stood beside him and coldly looked at his mad appearance. A trace of disdain flashed through her eyes. 3 days after the incident at the palace gates, late at night, the imperial censor's mansion suddenly caught on fire. Then, there was the sound of fighting. By the time the guards of the yamen and people in the inner city who had a good relationship with the Su family arrived, the entire imperial censor's mansion was already in ruins. When people rushed into the imperial censor's mansion, they only found 1 or 2 servants who were lucky enough to survive. The rest of the people had turned into charred corpses that had been burned by the fire. It was impossible to tell who was the Su family and who was the assassins. However, someone at the scene accidentally stepped on half of a burnt palace guard's token. Although the imperial censor's mansion was quickly taken over by people sent by the palace and all the unrelated people were driven out, some news still secretly spread. The entire capital fell into an even more strange and dignified atmosphere. 20 li outside of the capital city, on a secluded and deserted path. Leng Haoyu cupped his hands and smiled. Lord Su, young master Qingchen, 4th young master, take care of yourselves. 2 simple and inconspicuous carriages stopped by the side of the road. Su Qingchen sat in the carriage and said to Leng Haoyu with a faint smile, "This time, I've troubled young master Leng. Take care." Leng Haoyu smiled and said, "It's my duty to work for the prince. There will be Shadow Guard and Qi Lin secretly protecting you all along the way. You don't have to worry about your safety. As for the servants of the Imperial Censor's mansion, I'll also make arrangements. Please rest assured, Lord Su." Su Hongyan nodded and said, "Thank you for your trouble, young Master Leng. I'll take my leave now. Everyone, take care." Leng Haoyu nodded with a smile and stepped aside. The carriage slowly moved forward. In the carriage behind sat Madame Su. However, beside Madame Su was not her original maid, but the young miss of the Qin family, Qin Jing. Like Madame Su, Qin Jing was only wearing ordinary cotton clothes, but she was already beautiful and moving. However, she grabbed the corner of Madame Su's clothes with one hand. Obviously, she was a little uneasy about leaving home for the first time. Madame Su patted the back of her hand lovingly and said with a smile, "Jing, it's been hard on you. In the future, Auntie will definitely let Zhe hold a grand wedding for you." Qin Zhang's pretty face was slightly red and she whispered, "Since Zheng is engaged to the 2nd young master, how can I feel wronged?" Madame Su saw this and became more and more affectionate. She smiled lovingly and said, "Good child, if that child Qingze dares to bully you, mother will definitely stand up for you." Auntie, at the beginning of September, the Imperial Censor's mansion was attacked by assassins and the entire mansion turned into a sea of fire. 10 days later, the young miss of the Qin family, Qin Jing, who was engaged to the 2nd young master of the Su family since childhood, fell ill and died in less than half a month. Chapter 454. Although Mo Jingqi had forcefully suppressed the discussion of the murder case in the Su manor, how could such a thing be suppressed? Within a few days, the news that the emperor had sent people to assassinate the Su family and set it on fire had spread throughout the capital and the Dechu state. At the same time, Master Qingyun announced at Lishan Academy that because the emperor had killed the Su family for no reason, the Su family would move to the northwest to seek refuge. Lishan Academy would continue to open in the northwest. The students who did not move to the northwest could choose to study at other schools in Dechu State. Those who wished to continue studying at Lishan Academy could also study in the northwest. By the time the imperial court sent people to Yunzhou, the entire Yunzhou Su family had already left, leaving only an empty academy on Lishan Academy. When Mo Jingqi received the news, he was furious. He ordered people to set fire to Lishan Academy and announced to the world that the Su family had colluded with Prince Ding to rebel. He ordered all the prefectures in the northwest to arrest them. However, the Su family was protected by the shadow guard that Mo Xiuyao had specially sent to protect them. They did not enter the city at all. The various government offices were intimidated by Prince Ding's power and did not dare to make things difficult for the Su family. Unexpectedly, the Su family safely left Feihong Pass and headed to Ruyang. At the city gates of Ruyang, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao stood hand in hand outside the city gates. They looked at the carriages that were gradually approaching and revealed happy smiles. "They're here." Although they had been waiting for the news from the Shadow Guard, they were still worried when they did not see them arrive safely in Ruyang. At this moment, when she saw the fleet, Yili felt that her heart, which had been hanging in the air for the past few days, was finally at ease. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a smile. "I told you it was fine, but you were so worried that you almost scared Feng San, Qin Feng, and the others." If the people below saw that Princess Ding, who would not change her expression even if Mount Tai collapsed, was still so worried, who knows how many people would be scared. Yili also smiled a little embarrassedly. She was flustered because it had nothing to do with her. How could she not be worried when she thought that this matter concerned the entire Su family? Before the carriage reached the city gates, Yili let go of Mo Xiaoyao and went forward to welcome them. The one driving the carriage at the front was the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion. Seeing the people approaching, he immediately stopped the carriage and turned his head to say, "The prince and Wang Fei have come to welcome Mr. Qin Yun." The door of the first carriage opened, and Su Hongyu came out first. Together with the shadow guard who was driving the carriage, they helped a white-haired old man out of the carriage. Yili stood in front of the carriage and looked at the familiar yet strange old man in front of her. She only felt her eyes redden and tears unconsciously fell. The old man in front of him looked thin and distant. He had a head of white hair, but he didn't look old at all. Instead, his eyes were full of spirit. Seeing Yili standing in front of the carriage, the old man showed a hint of nostalgia and affection on his face. He seemed even more amiable and otherworldly, like a celestial being. Li. Mo Xiaoyao walked forward and saw Yili staring dazedly at Mr. Qin Yun with tears in her eyes. His heart ached slightly. He smiled helplessly and said, "Mr. Qin Yun has arrived. Why are you crying?" Yili found that her face was covered in tears. Long before her mother had passed away, her maternal grandfather had returned to Yunzhou. In between, Yili had recovered the memories of her previous life. She appeared to have not seen her maternal grandfather for many years. Now that she suddenly saw him, the scene of her maternal grandfather holding her on his knees as he read to her as a child flooded her mind. She actually unconsciously cried. Maternal grandfather. Yili greets maternal grandfather. When Yili knelt, Mo Xiaoyao didn't hesitate. He lifted his clothes and knelt on the ground with Yili. Mr. Qin Yun hurriedly pulled the two up and said, "Prince, you can't do this." Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, "Mr. Qin Yun is Li Li's maternal grandfather. Naturally, I should pay my respects." Mr. Qin Yun looked at Mo Xiaoyao's young head of white hair that was even whiter than his 70-year-old self. He couldn't help but sigh. He looked at Yili and smiled with gratification. "Good child, after not seeing you for so many years, maternal grandfather almost thought that he would never see you again. It is a blessing that we can meet again in this life. Why are you crying?" Yili hurriedly wiped away her tears and said with a smile, "Li forgot herself. Maternal grandfather and uncles are all here. How can I cry when our family is reunited? Maternal grandfather, uncles, and aunts have suffered along the way." In the carriage behind them, Su Qingchen supported eldest Madame Su. Qin Zheng supported second Madame Su as they walked down. Behind them was Su Hongyan. Su Qinbai couldn't help but smile when they saw this scene. Before he could say anything, a cheer came from the city gate. Su Qinyan had already rushed out like a gust of wind. Before he arrived, his voice had already reached them. Grandfather, father, mother, you're finally here. Your son missed you so much. Humph. Seeing his youngest son's jubilant face, Su Hongyu lightly snorted. Su Qingyan immediately became listless. He pitifully leaned against Su Qingbai and softly called out, "Fourth brother." Su Qingbai wordlessly reached out and patted his head. Su Qingyan glanced at his father, who was still staring at him, and hid behind Su Qingbai even more. Seeing him like this, Su Hongyu became angry. He narrowed his eyes and opened his mouth to scold him. Sir Qingyun looked at his youngest grandson, who saw his father like a mouse seeing a cat, and said with a smile, "Forget it. If there's anything, we'll talk about it later." Su Hongyu naturally wouldn't go against his father's wishes. He respectfully nodded and said, "Father is right." Li greets eldest aunt and second aunt. Yili then stepped forward to greet the two Su madams. She also smiled and greeted Su Qingchen and the others. Eldest brother, third brother, sister Zheng Seeing Qin Zheng's arrival, Yili was even happier. She turned back to look at Su Qingfeng and Su Qingze, who were walking quickly behind her. Eldest Madam Su took Yili and looked her up and down. She smiled and said, "When we left the capital, Li was still a little girl. Now you have a child of your own. In the blink of an eye, so many years have passed." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Indeed, so many years have passed. My two aunts must be tired from the journey. Let's go back to the city and rest first." Knowing that Sir Qingyun liked peace and quiet, Mo Xiuyao and Qinjing didn't arrange for many people to come and greet them. Only the two of them brought Su Qingfeng and the others to greet them at the city gate. When the group returned to the Prince Ding mansion, Steward Mo led everyone to greet them. The mansion had already prepared the courtyard and toiletries. They were only waiting for everyone to freshen up and rest. In the evening, they would invite the officials and generals of Ruyang City to welcome the Su family. Su Qingbai smiled at Yili and said, "Li Biaomei, there's no need to rush. We're all anxious to see our little nephew." Yili smiled and turned back to order Qing Wan, "Quickly go and ask the wet nurse to bring the baby over." Qing Wan left with a smile. Yili personally helped Sir Qingyun to sit at the head seat and personally served tea. Everyone took their seats. Su Qingze and the other two bowed to their grandfather and parents again. Sir Qingyun looked at his children and grandchildren, and the smile on his face became more affectionate. Although they had left Yunzhou, where the Su family had lived for several generations, it was still a very happy thing to be able to reunite with the family. Looking at Su Qingfeng, he smiled and said, "Fenger, I haven't seen you for several years. You look a lot more spirited." Compared to the other four young masters of the Su family, Su Qingfeng was considered an anomaly in the Su family. It wasn't that he didn't know how to read, but he didn't love those things that were insignificant. The Su family wouldn't look down on their children and grandchildren, but they weren't that comfortable. Now, it seemed that Su Qingfeng was showing off his ability and was bursting with heroism. Seeing his grandson like this, Sir Qingyun was very pleased. Chapter 455. Su Qingfeng smiled and said, "Grandfather is right. Grandson has learned a lot in Sister Li's army. This is all thanks to Sister Li. Everyone looked at Yili in surprise. Yili quickly waved her hand and smiled, "This is all third brother's own ability. I didn't help much." This was the truth. After throwing Su Qingfeng into Qilin, Yili didn't ask any more questions. This wasn't only because she wanted to give Qingfeng absolute trust and power. It was also for Su Qingfeng's own good. In a place like Qilin, if one still had to rely on connections, then it was better not to go. Otherwise, one wouldn't even know how one died. Fortunately, Su Qingfeng also had a stubborn temper. Compared to the other elites of the Mahist army, Su Qingfeng, who came from a normal army camp, didn't have an advantage. However, he gritted his teeth and persevered without a word. Even Qin Feng praised him. We were shocked when we heard that Li led the army to beat back the hundreds of thousands of Xiling's soldiers. It seems that our Su family is going to have a female general. Second Madame A.O. was more familiar with Yili and didn't have any scruples when she joked. Yili smiled helplessly and said, "Second aunt, you're also teasing Li. How am I a general?" Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yili with a smile and said, "Li is indeed not a general. However, Li is more powerful than a general." Hearing this, everyone laughed again. Little Shitzi is here. Mother Lin walked in with the baby in her arms. It was rare that the baby was still awake. Yili stood up and carried the baby. Seeing the baby's white and tender face, she was very happy. Turning around, he carried the baby to Master Qingyun and said with a smile, "Grandfather, look at the baby." Master Qingyun also had 5 grandchildren, so he was no stranger to carrying a baby. Reaching out to take the child in his arms, he carefully looked at him, then looked at Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao and said, "This child looks more like Li." Mo Xiaoyao smiled and nodded, but in his heart, he did not agree. Those who had seen Mo Xiaoyao and those who were close to him all said that he looked like Mo Xiaoyao. Those who were close to Yi Li all said that he looked like Yi Li. However, Mo Xiaoyao did not care who this little brat resembled. Yi Li smiled as she looked at Mo Xiaoyao. She knew what he was thinking, but she didn't point it out. Since Mr. Qingyun was holding the child, the others were too embarrassed to rush to see it. However, they couldn't help but glance over. Even Su Hongyu, who had been sitting still recently, turned to look at the child in Mr. Qingyun's arms. With so many pairs of eyes staring at him, how could Mr. Qingyun not feel it? He smiled and handed the baby to Su Hongyu and said, "Look, this child looks good." Once the child was in Su Hongyu's hands, the others did not have so many worries. Su Qingyan directly pulled Su Qingbai over to look. Although he had seen the baby before, Mo Xiaobao was getting cuter and cuter. He changed his appearance every day and could not get enough of looking at him. Su Qingchen also stood up and walked behind her father to look at the baby in his arms. It was Madame Su who said, "How can the child be comfortable with so many people surrounding him? Master also doesn't know how to hold a child. Let me hold him." So the baby went from Su Hongyu's hands to Madame Su. Then the onlookers became second Madame Su and Qinjing. Mo Xiaobao was passed around in everyone's hands. He did not cry. Madame Su was surprised and said, "This child is so obedient." Even Qingze, who was the least noisy in our family, was not so obedient. Mo Xiaoyao's mouth twitched slightly. He stared at the red ball in Madame Su's hands with disdain. Obedient? Who was the kid who cried every night and insisted on being held by Li? Su Hongyu smiled and said, "What's the child's name?" Su Qingyan answered first, Mo Xiaobao. Su Hongyu was stunned and his mouth twitched. What kind of name was this? Yili pursed her lips and smiled, "I haven't had time to give him a name. I was waiting for grandfather to come and give him a name. I just gave him a nickname." Could she tell her grandfather and uncle that the baby's father's tendency to name him was to embarrass the baby when he grew up? Mr. Qingyun was stunned for a moment, but he was very happy about it. He bowed his head and thought for a moment, in that case, how about Yu Qin? Yu had the meaning of commanding and commanding. Chen meant emperor. Everyone present was well read, and such a name caused everyone to be stunned. Su Qingbai frowned slightly. He hesitated and asked, "Grandfather, is this name Mr. Qingyun smiled faintly and said, "It's just a name. I think this child is suitable for this name." Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and nodded. Mr. Qingyun is right. It's just a name. I's son can't use a good name. Everyone was silent. Was this a problem of a name? No one dared to use such a name, even the emperor's son. Su Qingbai glanced at his grandfather, who had a calm expression on his face. His grandfather was a great scholar. He would know the meaning of this name, and he would never not know what was taboo. Since his father, eldest brother, and Prince Ding did not object, everyone must know. So he smiled and said, "I thought wrong." Madame Su saw that everyone had no objection. She looked lovingly at the baby in her arms and smiled, "Little baby, your name will be Mo Yuchen from now on." Little Yuchen. Mo Xiuyao glanced at the baby and said, "Madame Su, you don't have to be so polite. Just call him Mo Xiaobao." Mo Xiuyao spared no effort to destroy his son's reputation. He had to nail his nickname before Mo Xiaobao could speak. Mrs. Su was stunned. She looked at the baby in her arms, who was staring at her with big round eyes. She smiled and said, "Xiaobao. It's really a baby." Yili covered her face helplessly. "Xiaobao, I'm sorry." After the women and the baby went to rest, the hall quieted down. Mr. Qingyun looked sideways at Mo Xiuyao and Yili sitting side by side. A trace of relief flashed in his eyes and he asked, "Prince, have you really made up your mind?" Everyone was startled and looked at Mo Xiuyao in unison. Mo Xiuyao's lips twitched slightly and he smiled coldly. "What choice do I have to make? Didn't the royal family choose a Prince Ding mansion more than 10 years ago?" Everyone present couldn't help but fall silent. It was easy for power to intoxicate people. Back then, the ancestral emperor and the Ding king, Mo Lan Yun, had sworn an oath that their descendants would be brothers forever and share the great Chu empire. It might not have been a pretense, but it had only been a few generations, and the two families had already reached the point of life and death. The royal family's methods and actions were really too chilling. Su Hongyu looked at Mo Xiuyao and said, "Prince, do you have any plans now?" Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, "Of course I have plans, but I need to plan slowly." Su Hongyu nodded. It is good that the prince can calm down. The most worrying thing about Mo Xiuyao's current situation was that he couldn't keep his cool. Having just learned of the blood feud between his father and brother, as well as the pointless sacrifice of so many Mahist army, there weren't many people who could keep their cool. But compared to the Central Plains and Jiangnan, the Northwest was more remote and barren. If Prince Ding was too impatient and prematurely advanced, and if Mo Jingqi decided to fight to the death, in the end, both sides would suffer and the fishermen would benefit. Mo Xiuyao understood Su Hongyu's meaning and smiled faintly. "So many years have passed, what can't I wait for?" "Don't worry, Mr. Hongyu. In the future, many matters in the Northwest will have to trouble Mr. Hongyu and Mr. Hongyan." With these words, he had the intention of entrusting them with important tasks. Su Hongyu nodded slightly. "It is my duty." Chapter 456. Yili said, "Li He has prepared a residence not far from the Wang Fu for my two uncles. However, due to the lack of time, there are still many places that have not been cleaned up. I will have to trouble my uncles and cousins to stay in the Wang Fu for the time being." Originally, Yili had thought that everyone would stay in the Wang Fu. After all, the Wang Fu was big enough and there was no need to worry about not having enough space. However, both of her uncles were elders after all, and they each had their own families. Her cousins, other than her fifth brother, were all of marriageable age. Although living in the Wang Fu would not cause her uncles, aunts, and cousins to feel uncomfortable, she was worried that they would feel uncomfortable. Su Hongyu nodded and said, Li has troubled you. Yili smiled and looked eagerly at Master Qin Yun, saying, Grandfather, how about living in the Wang Fu? If Li and Prince have any questions, they can ask me at any time. Nonsense. Master Qin Yun glanced at her and softly reprimanded, how can a grandfather stay at his granddaughter's home? If other people knew, they would think that your uncle is unfilial. Also, the residence that you have arranged will not be far from the Wang Fu. If you miss your grandfather, you can just walk around more. Also, grandfather is used to living in the countryside and is not used to places that are too lively. Yili naturally knew that Master Qin Yun would not allow it. She was not dejected and said with a smile, Li is fooling around. Grandfather, uncle, don't be angry. There is a residence on a mountain 5 li outside the city. The scenery is not bad. Prince had someone buy it a few days ago. Just treat it as a gift from Li and Prince to grandfather. Grandfather, please do not refuse. Master Qingyun's expression was gentle as he said with a faint smile, Grandfather knows that you are filial. Grandfather will not refuse. We can go back and reopen the academy. Thinking of the Lishan Academy that had already been turned to ashes, Master Qingyun was not without any sadness. Although all the ancient books had been taken away, Lishan Academy was an ancient place with special meaning. Yili nodded and said, Grandfather, do not worry. Lishan Academy will definitely be reopened. It will be even better than before. Master Qingyun nodded, you are right. The Su family's welcoming banquet was held at the Ding Wang Fu. In order to show respect to the Su family, Mo Xiaoyao invited all the civil and military officials in Ruyang. He even informed the Prince Ding Mansion's trusted elites stationed in other prefectures in the northwest. She very seriously introduced the Su family to the generals and officials of the northwest. It also made everyone understand that the Su family was not just the maternal family of Ding Wangfei. In the future, they would have an important position in the northwest. And because of the Su family's original reputation, people naturally didn't have any thoughts of rejection or jealousy. As long as one was slightly knowledgeable, they would understand that the Su family coming to the northwest at this time would only be beneficial to Prince Ding's residence and the Mo family army. The banquet was naturally very lively, and the atmosphere was harmonious and festive. Walking back with the others, when they passed through the garden, they saw Qin Jing sitting alone in the pavilion by the pond, lost in thought. Yili stopped and asked softly, why is Sister Jing here? Qin Shuang said, just now at the banquet, Miss Qin seemed to be a little uncomfortable, so she left first. Qin Shuang said, Miss Qin came to the northwest alone, perhaps she is not used to it. Yili lowered her eyebrows and thought for a moment, then said, wait here for a while. Yili walked into the pavilion with light steps and laughed softly, Sister Zheng, why are you sitting here? Qin Zheng was clearly startled. Turning back to see Yili, she let out a sigh of relief and stood up, Wang Fei. Yili reached out to stop her from standing up. She said with a helpless smile, it's only been a year, but Sister Zheng and I have become more distant. Qin Zheng looked awkwardly at Yili, not knowing what to say. Yili said with a smile, could it be that after Sister Zheng and Ji get married, you will continue to call me Wang Fei? Qin Zheng's face reddened. She stared helplessly at Yili, feeling a bit more at ease. After teasing, Yili sat down and held Qin Zheng's hand, saying, I see that Sister Zheng is unhappy. Is there something you are not used to, or did the Fu neglect you in some way? Qin Zheng quickly shook her head, the corners of her eyes red. She said in a low voice, everyone is very good to me. It's just, I miss home. Father and mother raised me and were very obedient. But I have not repaid them at all and have left them. I am really unfilial. Yili sighed softly and patted Qin Zheng's hand. She said softly, Lord Qin and Madame Qin are willing to let sister leave the capital. Naturally, it is for sister's happiness. Sister, you just have to settle down in the northwest. It's not like you will never have a chance to meet again. Right now, the most important thing is Heir Gu and Sister Jing's marriage. In the evening, eldest aunt and second aunt told me about this matter. It seems that Heir Gu and second aunt are anxious to marry Sister Jing. Qin Zhang's beautiful face was so red it could drip blood. But she could not avoid Yi Li's teasing and could only cover her face with her hands. She said discontentedly, we haven't seen each other for a year. Why is Li learning from Muro? Yi Li said with a smile, what's wrong with learning from Muro? Say what is on your mind, lest it bothers you. Chapter 457. Mo Xiuyao's almost tangible resentment finally attracted Yi Li's attention. She turned to look at the man sitting by the bed, staring at the baby in her hands with a gloomy face, and sighed helplessly in her heart. Other men hated that they could not have a precious son, but the one in front of her was like his son was his enemy in his previous life. She carefully placed the baby in Mo Xiuyao's hands and smiled. Prince, are you still young? Why are you throwing a tantrum with the baby? Mo Xiuyao snorted and ravaged the little meatball in his hands with heartache. Did you raise him to be so fat to eat? Yi Li rolled her eyes. The baby was round, white, and tender, but he was far from fat, okay? Fortunately, Mo Xiuyao also knew that his Yi Li did not like others disdaining her precious son, so he did not say more. He only disdained Mo Xiuyao, who did not know anything and was powerless to resist his ravaging, and asked, why did you come back so late? Yi Li told him about seeing Qin Jing in the garden and then asked, eldest aunt and second aunt's intention is to set the wedding date after the baby's 1-month birthday party. Eldest aunt's intention is to let sister Jing get married from eldest uncle's residence. In my opinion, it is better to get married from the prince's residence. What do you think? After all, marrying from eldest uncle's home to second uncle's home did not seem right. Mo Xiuyao thought for a moment and said, we don't have any elders in our residence. You can't send Qin Jing to get married. In terms of age, you are younger than her. How about this? General Liu, General Zhang, and their families are all in Ruyang. You see which family is suitable for them to take Qin Jing as their adopted daughter. When the time comes, she will get married from the general's residence. General Liu and General Zhang are both top generals in the Mahist army. It is not a disgrace for Qin Jing to become their disciple. In this way, the Su family and the Mahist army will be connected by marriage. After all, the Prince Ding mansion started with military exploits. With this relationship, it will be much more convenient for the Su family in the northwest. Both Zhang Qilan and Lu Jingxian were highly respected veterans of the Mahist army. With their support, the Mahist army's rejection of the Su family would be greatly reduced. At the end of the day, as long as it was an army, there was no one who wasn't xenophobic. Yi Li didn't expect Mo Xiuyao to have thought of so many things in such a short time. Most of them were for the sake of the Su family. She felt a slight sweetness in her heart and said softly, thank you for thinking so much for the Su family. Mo Xiuyao snorted softly and lowered his head to play with his son. Yi Li looked helplessly at the man who lowered his head and ignored her. She really wanted to ask, Prince, are you being arrogant? The news of the birth of the little heir of Prince Ding's residence spread to the surrounding countries at an extremely fast speed. Not to mention, Mo Xiuyao had also sent out invitations everywhere to invite the influential officials of various countries to Ruyang to attend the little heir's 1-month-old birthday banquet. After receiving the gorgeous invitation with the Ding Mansion symbol, countless people smashed the priceless antiques and calligraphy in the study. Shiling Jinan Palace in the study, Genin of Gojosian stared at the gorgeous invitation on the table and narrowed his eyes dangerously. Genin of Gojosian didn't say anything. The other people in the study naturally didn't dare to speak either. For a moment, the atmosphere was heavy and oppressive. After a long time, Genin of Gojosian's son, Leitingfeng, who was standing to the side, said, "Father, what does Mo Xiuyao mean by this? Is he really going to break off relations with the Dechu state?" As the Prince Ding of the Dechu state, no matter how famous the Ding mansion was, they didn't have the qualifications to invite the influential officials of the various countries to a prince's one-month-old celebration. In fact, even the royal families of the various countries wouldn't invite the influential officials of other countries to a prince's one-month-old celebration. However, if Mo Xiuyao broke off relations with the Dechu state and established himself as the king, then at least he had the qualifications to speak with the royal families of the various countries. Thus, this invitation wasn't considered disrespectful. As for whether Mo Xiuyao was willing to hold a one-month-old celebration for his son, no one could stop him. Genin of Gojosian sneered, "The Ding mansion and the Dechu state will break off relations sooner or later. It's not unexpected. However, I didn't expect that Princess Ding would be able to return alive." What was even more unexpected was that after falling from such a high cliff, not only was Princess Ding fine, even the child in her stomach was fine. Mo Xiuyao's luck was so good that it made people hate him. Thinking of this matter, Genin of Gojosian's face became even uglier. Not only did he lose to a woman, but it was also a pregnant woman. Yi Li. Genin of Gojosian gritted his teeth. Leitingfeng glanced at his father's sinister face. However, he wasn't as angry as Genin of Gojosian. Thinking of the graceful woman in green who looked elegant but always shocked people, Leitingfeng couldn't deny that when he heard the news of Princess Ding's death, he also felt a faint sense of pity. He didn't expect that Princess Ding would return safely and give birth to Prince Ding's son. A faint sense of envy arose in Leitingfeng's heart. However, he quickly dismissed this thought. "Father, should we go to Prince Ding's one-month-old celebration?" Although Ruyang wasn't far from the Dechu state and the Xiling border, it wasn't close to the Xiling palace. This invitation was probably sent out by Prince Ding the moment he was born. It didn't even have the name of the little prince. Even so, if they wanted to attend the banquet, they had to leave immediately. Otherwise, they might not be able to make it in time. "We're going. Of course we're going." Genin of Gojosian laughed coldly. "Do you really think that Mo Xiuyao is only doing this for his son's one-month-old celebration? I'm afraid that Ruyang City will be very lively this time." Leitingfeng lowered his eyebrows and thought for a moment. He immediately understood. "Father, are you talking about the Imperial Jade Seal and the previous dynasty's Gaozu's treasure?" Genin of Gojosian nodded. "That's right. Rather than letting people sneak in and out of the northwest, it's better for him to open the door and invite them over. At the very least, these people can still be under his surveillance. Mo Xiuyao has thought of a good idea." Leitingfeng frowned and said, "In Royal Father's opinion, is the Imperial Jade Seal really in Mo Xiuyao's hands? The news we received seems to be that the Prince Ding Mansion's people are secretly looking for someone called Lin Yuan, and it's related to the Imperial Jade Seal." Lin Yuan. Lin. Genin of Gojosian pondered. Leitingfeng said, "Lin is the previous dynasty's national surname. This Lin Yuan is also known as Tan Jiji. It said that he wanted to kidnap Princess Ding to threaten Prince Ding in the northwest, but somehow the news leaked out and he was captured by Prince Ding. After Mo Xiuyao released him, he spread the news. Not long after, the news spread that the Imperial Jade Seal was in the Prince Ding mansion. Not only the Prince Ding mansion, even Mo Jingqi is looking for him." Genin of Gojosian thought for a while and said, "I have some impression of this Tan Jiji. Su Zuidi once said that he's an orphan of the previous dynasty's imperial family. An orphan of the previous dynasty's imperial family. Lei Tingfeng curled his lips disapprovingly. It's been more than 100 years since the previous dynasty was destroyed. Who cares about orphans? If that's the case, who knows how many orphans there are in this world? Every time a dynasty changes, there will be a few descendants of the imperial family living among the common people. Who can really succeed in reviving the country? The reason why the story of enduring hardships can be passed down through the ages is because he's just an example. Father already knew the identity of this Tanjiji. Genin of Gojoseon obviously didn't put Tanjiji in his eyes. He smiled faintly and said, "It's not important to us whether he's a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family or a traitor. As long as he can help Imo Jingqi deal with the Prince Ding mansion, he's not an enemy to us. Since that's the case, I will naturally keep his identity a secret." It's a pity. That woman Su Zuidi. Since she can tell his identity, how can she not tell others? Chapter 458. Lei Tingfeng frowned. Then who does father think has the imperial jade seal? Genim of Gojoseon pondered for a moment and said, with the temperament of the people in the Ding mansion, the imperial jade seal is not important to them. Mo Xiuyao is more arrogant than Mo Lufang. He disdains to use the imperial jade seal to raise the prestige of the Mahist army. Lei Tingfeng said, "Father means." Genim of Gojoseon waved his hand. "No, the imperial jade seal may not be in Mo Xiuyao's hands, but it may not be in Tanjiji's hands either. So this trip, we must go to the northwest. At least, the imperial jade seal cannot fall into the hands of others." "I understand." Lei Tingfeng nodded. "Father is going to Ruyang personally." Genim of Gojoseon nodded. "You go with I. There are no major events in West Hill recently. I accept." The atmosphere in the imperial study of the Chu Palace became more dignified. Mo Jingqi was so angry that his face turned black. He threw the invitation in his hand far away. "Mo Yuchen. What a good Mo Yuchen. Mo Xiuyao, you are very good." Mo Jingli, who also received an invitation and entered the imperial study, saw the invitation marked with the Prince Ding mansion seal. Raising his hand to catch it, Mo Jingli smiled and said, "Brother, who made you so angry?" Seeing this brother of the same mother, Mo Jingqi's face became more ugly. He said coldly, "What are you doing in the imperial palace?" Mo Jingli smiled and took out another invitation. He smiled and said, "I came to pay my respects to mother." In addition, it seems that brother also received Prince Ding's invitation. "What are you planning to do?" He opened the invitation and saw the name of the heir of the Prince Ding mansion written on it, Mo Yuchen. Yuchen. What a good name. Mo Xiuyao, you can't hold it in anymore. Mo Jingqi looked at his younger brother coldly. After his brother returned from the south, he had obviously become smarter and harder to deal with. If he didn't suddenly become enlightened, then there must be an expert guiding him from behind. "What are your plans? Since Mo Xiuyao sent someone to send you an invitation, does Imperial Brother plan to go?" Mo Jingli smiled and said, "Prince Ding personally sent an invitation, how could Imperial Brother not go? What gift does Imperial Brother intend to give to Prince Ding?" Mo Jingqi coldly snorted. Suddenly, a malicious smile appeared on his face as he said, "But Royal Brother should go. After all, Yili and Royal Brother are not strangers. Furthermore, she is Princess Consort Li's elder sister." At the mention of this, Mo Jingli's expression became ugly. Whenever he thought of Yili who only knew how to cry and whine in his fu, and then thought of Yili who could go to the battlefield and the court and had the support of the Su family behind her, Mo Jingli couldn't help but have a stomachache whenever he thought of the fact that Yili had once been his fiancée. If he had taken Yili back then, what would it have been like? With Yili's ability to defeat Genom of Gojoseon of Shilin, maybe he wouldn't have needed to fight his imperial brother in the north and south, and would have directly attacked the Chu capital. And that Su Qingchen, how much trouble had she caused for him in the south? If his princess consort was Yili, Su Qingchen would not only not cause trouble for him, she would help him. Maybe she could even help him take down Nanzhao, and not be controlled by Nanzhao like now. Seeing Mo Jingli's expression suddenly turn dark, Mo Jingqi's mood instantly improved. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Since imperial brother is going, why not bring princess consort Li with you? She can also reminisce about the past with Yili." Mo Jingli gritted his teeth and said lightly, "Many thanks for imperial brother's advice. Since this is the case, Chen Di will go and prepare first. Seeing that there isn't much time left, we will depart for the northwest tomorrow morning." Mo Jingqi nodded and said, "Imperial brother, please go." When Mo Jingli left, the smile on Mo Jingqi's face disappeared without a trace. Did Mo Jingli think that he didn't know what he wanted to do in the northwest? To celebrate Mo Xiaoyao's son's 1-month birthday? Humph. Mo Jingli would only want Mo Xiaoyao's son to die early more than him. Because the child's mother was his former fiancée. Yi Li's existence was simply telling everyone in the world that he, King Li, was blind as a bat. You want to go to the northwest to find the imperial jade seal? Mo Jingli, your appetite is a bit too big. Emperor. Is there any news of Tan Jiji's whereabouts? Mo Jingqi asked coldly as he looked at the gray-clothed person kneeling in the hall. Emperor, please forgive me. For now, there is no news of Tan Jiji's whereabouts. Bang! Mo Jingqi grabbed the inkstone on the table and threw it over. The gray-clothed person on the ground naturally didn't dare to dodge. The inkstone hit his shoulder and fell to the ground. The gray-clothed person gave a muffled grunt. Emperor, please forgive me. A group of trash. Go search again. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, you must find Tan Jiji for Zhen. Yes. There were still a few days until Prince Ding's 1-month-old banquet, but Ruyang City was already bustling with noise and excitement. Because of last year's war in the northwest, many wealthy merchants fled to the borders. As a result, the commerce in the northwest had stagnated and even regressed. This time, the moment Mo Xiaobao was born, the Prince Ding mansion announced to the world that they were wantonly celebrating the little heir. Because of the previous dynasty's treasures and the imperial jade seal, a steady stream of people poured into the northwest. In less than a month, Ruyang City seemed to have slowly become prosperous. Previously, the largest city in the northwest, Xinyang City, had turned into a sea of fire. Now that the Prince Ding mansion was stationed in Ruyang City seemed to gradually become the largest city in the northwest. In order to entertain guests from all over, the common people in the city had already tidied up their homes early on, preparing to take advantage of this bustle to make a fortune. In the Prince Ding mansion, because of the addition of the Su family, Mo Xiaoyao and Yili felt a lot more relaxed. In the Su family, other than Master Qingyun, who was already old and enjoying his life in the mansion and would occasionally visit Su Jie, who was recuperating, Su Hongyu, Su Hongyan, and the 5 young masters of the Su family, even the youngest, Su Qingyan, could follow Su Qingbai and help out a little. Su Hongyu and Su Qingchen were originally rare geniuses. With them, Mo Xiaoyao immediately threw most of the affairs in the northwest to them. His days were very relaxed and comfortable. Li, did you write this thing? In the spacious study, several tables were placed together to form a large table. All kinds of documents and files were neatly arranged on top of it. Several people sat around the table. As they dealt with the files in their hands, they would occasionally exchange a few words. Although everyone had their own study, under normal circumstances, they still liked to deal with business in the large study. It was not cold and boring, and when they could not make up their minds, they could ask for the opinions of others. Su Qingshan raised his head and asked as he held a file about the business plans in the Northwest. Yili raised her head from between the files and looked blankly at Su Qingshan. She did not know what he was talking about. Mo Xiaoyao, sitting next to her, glanced and said, "It's about the business development plan in the Northwest." "Ah. I wrote it." Yili finally remembered. She said with some embarrassment, "Actually, I only have a general idea. I am not familiar with these things." "Didn't you say before that it was given to Mingxi and Ling Er to handle?" Mo Xiaoyao said, "Ling Er has returned to the pass. Han Mingxi has to manage the Northwest and Nanzhao and Beirong by himself. He is too busy, so it was put aside for now." Hearing them say this, the others also raised their heads to look at Su Qingshan. Su Qingshan handed the file in his hand to Su Hongyu. Everyone looked at it. Su Hongyu nodded and praised, "Li Er's idea is very novel. We can try and see if it works." Although the Su family was a scholarly family, they were not pedantic. They naturally understood what business meant to a city and even a country. Compared to the rich central plains in the Jiangnan region, the Northwest was not considered to be rich. Even the food supply was relatively poor. If they could not find another way, there would be a day when the Mo army would gradually wither away due to the poverty in the Northwest. At first, when they saw Yili and Mo Xiaoyao go in and out every day to deal with the politics of the Northwest and the military affairs of the Maoist army, everyone was surprised. But when they saw the Maoist army generals appear accustomed to it, they felt very gratified. Li had enough talent and ability. Most importantly, Prince Ding was willing to give her trust and space to show her ability. This made the Su family's impression of Mo Xiaoyao much better. Chapter 459. The dossier was passed around the room. Su Qingbai was the most interested in this plan. Originally, when he was sent to the southwest region, he was prepared to show off his skills but was summoned back to the capital. Now that he saw this plan, he immediately recalled the feeling of wanting to show off his ambitions when he first arrived in the southwest region. "Li Er, what do you think?" Looking up and seeing everyone staring at her, Yili could only put down the dossier in her hand and ask Zhuo Jing to bring over a map to hang on the wall. She also had someone bring over some freshly brewed tea. After thinking seriously for a while, she said, "The Northwest area is less than 1/6 of the Dechu states, and its population is less than 1/10 of the Dechu states. Although Hongzhou is known as the Northwest's granary, it is still lacking compared to the Southwest, which is known as Tianfu. If it were peacetime, it wouldn't matter. We would only need to import a small amount of food to feed the people and soldiers in the Northwest. But in reality, the worst-case scenario is that we might have to face the 3 million troops of the Dechu state, the northern tribes, and Xiling at the same time. And even if there is no war, the three countries only need to seal off the Northwest's food and economy. Even if the Northwest doesn't immediately fall into trouble, it will only become poorer and poorer. At the same time, the Maoist army will become weaker and weaker. Extinction is only a matter of time." Everyone was indifferent. What Yili said was the truth. It wasn't that the people present didn't know, but that no one had ever laid out the data so clearly in front of them. Because it was clear, it was even more shocking. Feng Zhiyao frowned. "What if we take the initiative to attack? Expand our territory in the Northwest?" Su Hongyu frowned. "It's not impossible, but Xiling's land is barren. Most of their food comes from the Dechu state, Nanzhao, and the western countries. The northern tribes are vast grasslands and deserts. The northern tribes mainly eat cows and sheep. The Dechu state cannot be touched for the time being. Once the Mahist army moves against the Dechu state, it is very likely that Xiling, the northern tribes, and Nanzhao will attack the Mahist army at the same time. Actually, with the Mahist army's strength, what General Feng said might not be impossible, but the losses would be huge. I think Li Er's idea is to take it slow. Yili nodded. That's right. If we make the Northwest a mess, we will be the ones to clean up the mess. Unless we can take down Xiling or northern tribes within half a year. The Mahist army was not just any army to the Mahist army. Because no matter who wanted to conquer the world or do something else, if they were not strong enough, they would only be ignored by others. When they were strong enough, they could even do anything. As for the Mo family army, from the very beginning, they had been set as everyone's opponent, too. Su Qingyan tilted his body and stretched his neck to look at the thing in Su Qingbai's hand. He asked, Sister Li has already considered so much. Then, there must be a way to solve it. Yili smiled helplessly. How can we solve these problems in such a short time? But I have ordered people to survey the entire northwest region. Other than the vicinity of Hongzhou, in Ganzhou, which is the middle reaches of Min River, there is a large area of plains. The soil and water quality are excellent. It is just that this area is connected to the northern tribes, so there are very few people. Large areas of fertile land are not cultivated. Su Qingbai said thoughtfully, Li you mean to move the people to Ganzhou to cultivate the land? Then there must be a large number of troops stationed at the border to prevent the northern tribes from raiding. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. This is not a problem. Now the Mahist army has hundreds of thousands of soldiers who have nothing to do. Moreover, the Mahist army will expand in the future. There is no need to worry about not having enough people to guard it. Yili also nodded. If the people are not assured, the Mahist army can cultivate the land first, or cultivate it together with the people. The Mahist army and the people cultivate together. Everyone frowned and hesitated. Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and smiled. Li Er's idea is not bad. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers do not need to fight for the time being. Using them to cultivate the land is not bad. In this way, the Mahist army will have their own harvest and can also reduce the taxes of the people. Su Qingbai nodded and asked impatiently, then Li what do you think of the business hub that you mentioned? Yili massaged her temples and tidied up her hair before saying, in this world, there is not only the Dechu state, the northern tribes, Xiling, and Nanzhao. To the west of Xiling, there are countless small countries and even large countries that we do not know of. It is only because of the long distance that most people do not know of them. Our northwest region is now surrounded by other countries. If we sell the goods of Eastern Chu, northern tribes, and Nanzhao to the countries further west through Xiling, then bring their goods back and sell them to the Dechu state or the northern tribes, they will attract merchants. In the future, Ruyang and even the entire northwest region will become an important economic and trade area between the east and the west. Su Qingbai was a smart person and naturally understood at once. He smiled and said, Li when do you plan on starting? You have to count me in. Me too. Su Qingyan had always adhered to the policy of following his fourth brother and quickly raised his hand to vote. Yili smiled and said, we have already sent some people to the agriculture area. As for business, fourth brother has no experience, you can ask Han Mingxi and Leng Haoyu. Thinking of the busy Han Mingxi and Leng Haoyu, Yili felt a headache coming on. She then thought of a certain person who was currently dispirited somewhere and felt some regret. She should not have killed Su Zuidi so quickly. Otherwise, she would have gotten such a good free worker. Reporting to Prince and Princess Consort, King Li and Princess Consort Li of the Chu capital have arrived. As she spoke, a guard came in to report. King Li. Jingli. Yi Li was startled. She did not expect him to come to Ruyang and bring Ying with him. Speaking of which, Yi Li had not seen Ying for nearly 2 years. Originally, she had been imprisoned by Jingqi. Now that Jingli had returned to the capital and was holding a large number of troops, he seemed to be on par with Jingqi. As princess consort Li, Ying was naturally free. Xiaoyao stood up and smiled. Jingli. Since that's the case. Li, let's go welcome King Li and Princess Consort Li. I also want to see how much this Jingli has grown after not seeing him for so long. Yi Li naturally did not have any objections. She stood up and followed Xiaoyao outside. Only Su Qingbai still had questions to ask and seemed to want to continue. Although it was called a welcome, it was only when Chief Steward invited them in that Yi Li and Xiaoyao walked to the entrance of the hall to welcome them. Jingli clearly did not expect to receive any good treatment from Xiaoyao. His expression was still normal. Just as they approached the Prince Ding Mansion's hall, they saw a beautiful couple standing at the entrance. Xiaoyao was dressed in a light purple brocade robe. His snow-white hair was casually pulled back. Compared to before, he seemed to be more cold and intimidating. Yi Li, on the other hand, was dressed in a light green dress with a silver peony pattern. Her smile was as gentle as before, but there was more nobility and charm between her brows. Seeing the smiling green-clothed woman standing beside Xiaoyao, Jingli's eyes flashed. For a moment, he did not know what to feel. Chapter 460. Li Wang and Li Wang Fei are honored by your presence, welcome. Seeing that Xiaoyao did not plan on speaking, Yi Li said with a faint smile. Before this year, Ying was very different from the fourth miss of the Yi family whose name had spread through the capital. Her expression, which had always been weak and helpless, was now filled with hidden bitterness and stupefaction. Her watery eyes, which were as clear as autumn waters, had become much sharper, and her originally weak temperament had weakened a lot. Following silently by Jingli's side, she looked more like a princess than before. But Yi Li did not miss the hint of jealousy and bitterness that flashed through Yi Ying's eyes when she looked at her. She couldn't help but laugh inside. Yi Ying might have suffered greatly these past 2 years, but what did she have to be jealous of her? Jealous that she had led troops to battle and risked her life on the battlefield? Or jealous that she had almost lost her life when she fell off the cliff? Jingli looked at the two people standing side by side in front of him and said coolly, "Long time no see, how have you been?" Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow in surprise. Jingli knew how to greet him properly. It seemed that he had learned some bad things in the past year. He nodded coolly and said with a faint smile, "Thank you for your concern." Jingli's expression froze and he looked as ugly as if he had swallowed a fly. Who was concerned about him? Yi Li smiled and looked at Xiaoyao. Jingli said with a smile, "Please come in." After entering the hall and sitting down, Yi Li noticed that Jingli had brought another person. It was also a familiar face that she had not seen in a long time, Princess Xixia. Princess Xixia was dressed as a servant girl and followed beside Jingli. But she kept her head down. Yi Li thought that she was just a normal servant girl. However, she followed everyone into the hall. Yi Li realized that something was wrong. No wonder Yi Ying's expression was so ugly. When Jingli left the Chu capital, he brought Princess Xixia with him. She didn't expect that he would bring her with him to the northwest. Clearly, Jingli treated Princess Xixia differently. The host and guests sat down. Yi Li hesitated for a moment, then looked at Princess Xixia and said, "This is..." Before Jingli could say anything, Yi Ying opened her mouth and said indifferently, she's just a servant girl. Third sister, why do you care about her? Hearing this, Mo Jingli's expression darkened. Princess Xixia's expression was also ugly. Originally, with Princess Xixia's status, she was more than qualified to be an equal concubine. But after the commotion at the wedding, Princess Xixia had no choice but to fake her death to discuss this matter. Originally, Yili thought that Mo Jingli would quickly find another identity for Princess Xixia. She didn't expect that even now, this concubine's identity was still unknown. Seeing that Mo Jingli didn't speak, Yili didn't care. She ordered someone to bring tea. Prince Ding's current appearance has given I quite a fright, Yi Futian said. Mo Jingli said. Although he had long heard of Prince Ding's white hair, Mo Jingli was still a little surprised to see it with his own eyes. He glanced sideways at Yili sitting next to Mo Xiuyao. In his mind, he assessed that Yili was more important to Mo Xiuyao than they thought. Mo Xiuyao didn't care at all. He casually brushed back the hair that fell to his chest and said with a smile, "Flowers bloom and wilt. Birth, old age, illness, and death are all normal. Why care? But I heard that Prince Li has been very proud of his success in Jiangnan this year." Mo Jingli tugged at the corner of his lips and said, "Prince Ding overpraises me. How can I be as free as Prince Ding who occupies the northwest?" The two men began to argue back and forth. If it was in the past, Mo Jingli might not have had the courage and confidence to contend with Mo Xiuyao. But it was different now. Mo Xiuyao occupied the northwest, while he occupied Jiangnan. Compared to the barren and rich northwest, Jiangnan clearly had an advantage. Yili smiled at Yiying and said with a smile, "Fourth sister, how have you been this year?" Yiying looked at Yili with a complicated expression. She snorted and said with a cold smile, "Third sister, don't you know that I was imprisoned by the emperor? How good can a prisoner be?" Her words seemed to be blaming Yili for not saving her when she knew that Mo Jingqi had imprisoned her. Yili didn't care. She and Yiying didn't have a deep sisterly relationship. If it was said that it was a small matter, she would have saved her. But at that time, Yiying could be said to be Mo Jingqi's hostage to Mo Jingli. Naturally, she would be heavily guarded. Why would she waste the effort to sacrifice her own subordinate? Yili's expression was normal in the face of Yi Ying's questioning. She comforted her, "Now that fourth sister and Prince Li have reunited, and you have Prince Li's heir, your days will be over." Hearing this, Yi Ying's face darkened and her expression became even uglier. Yili thought for a moment and immediately understood. Mo Jingli probably didn't intend to make Yi Ying's child the heir. That's right. Mo Jingli was still young. If he wanted to have a child, how could he not have one? And Yiying could be said to have no foundation other than her half-sister. She couldn't even compare to the families of ordinary officials. And her sister didn't have a good relationship with her. The two families were even enemies. Of course, Mo Jingli wouldn't consider making Yi Ying's child the heir. He was probably already planning to choose a woman with a good family background as his concubine. Yili naturally couldn't care about these things. She simply didn't ask and pulled Yiying to talk about other things. Yiying listened to Yili in silence. After a long time, she suddenly asked, "Third sister, why do you want father to retire and return to his hometown?" Yili raised her eyebrows. Was she questioning her? Yili pursed her lips and smiled faintly. Her smile was a little cold. "Father is old and has risen to the top in the imperial court. What's wrong with retiring at the top?" Yiying bit her lip and looked at Yili resentfully. No one knew how she felt after being released from the prison and finding out that her parents and relatives were no longer in the capital. Prince didn't care about her as much as before. He was just cold and indifferent. He didn't even look at her child. If father was still here, he wouldn't be like this. Yi Li certainly understood Yi Ying's unwillingness and resentment. She sneered in her heart. If Minister Yi didn't retire and return to his hometown, he would have been killed by Mo Jingqi. He wouldn't have waited for Yi Ying to come out. She originally thought that Yi Ying had grown up after more than a year of suffering. Now it seemed that she was still so naive and ignorant. Although Yi Ying and Yi Li were relatives, Yi Li didn't arrange for Mo Jingli and his group to stay in the Prince Ding mansion. Instead, she arranged for them to stay in a courtyard specially set aside in Ruyang City. This place was specially prepared to receive dignitaries or envoys from various countries. Although the Maoist army didn't have a good relationship with the various countries, war wasn't something that could be easily started. It was impossible for people to not interact with each other. Although this courtyard wasn't as luxurious as the rest of the post house in the Chu capital, it wasn't bad at the time and was big enough. Even if people from the Chu state's northern tribes in Xiling came, they didn't have to worry about not being able to accommodate them. Before she could arrange for Mo Jingli and his group to stay, Director Mo came to report, Princess Consort, Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling and Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling have arrived. The Crown Prince of the Northern Tribes has also arrived with the Crown Princess and the 7th Prince. The Crown Princess of Nanzhao has also arrived. Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li looked at each other. This time, the 4 countries were all present, and the missions they sent out were all very important. This gave enough face to Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao. Of course, they couldn't rule out the possibility that the Dechu state and the Maoist army were involved. A cold light flashed in Mo Xiuyao's eyes. He stood up with a smile and pulled Yi Li. He smiled and said, "It seems that there are many important guests today. Li, let's go out and welcome them." Yi Li smiled and nodded, then followed Mo Xiuyao out. Chapter 461. It was bustling and crowded outside the main entrance of Prince Ding's residence. It was unknown if it was a coincidence or if it was done on purpose, but the distinguished guests from the 3 countries had rushed to the entrance of Prince Ding's residence at the same time. Hence the entrance of Prince Ding's residence was completely surrounded by the carriages, attendants and guards of these people. However, with the Black Cloud Cavalry acting as guards outside the Prince Ding mansion, these people could not even think about getting close to the Prince Ding mansion. The Prince Ding mansion's door opened from the inside. Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li came out hand in hand. Under the sunlight, the snow-white hair flashed with a cold luster. The people who just came out of the carriage were stunned. They were the most powerful group of people in their respective kingdoms. They had already received Mo Xiuyao's white hair message. But just like Mo Jingli, when they saw the white-haired man in front of them, they could not hide their surprise. But what was puzzling was that when the princess consort fell off the cliff and disappeared, Prince Ding was fine. How come when Princess Ding came back, Prince Ding's hair turned white overnight? You have all come from afar. I hope you will forgive me for being late. Mo Xiuyao glanced at the crowd and smiled apologetically. We dare not. We are already familiar with Prince Ding. Prince Ding, why are you being so polite? This is Princess Ding. Seeing you today, you really live up to your reputation. The young man in the royal family of the northern tribes was tall and straight. He had the rough and handsome appearance of the people of the northern tribes, but his aura was extraordinary. Standing beside him was the 7th prince of the northern tribes, Yilu Yi, and Princess Ronghua, who had not been seen for a long time. Princess Ronghua nodded at Yi Li and smiled faintly. Her beautiful face was not as pale and delicate as it was in the Chu capital. Instead, it was more rosy and healthy. It seemed that Princess Ronghua had been living well in the northern tribes for more than a year. The man who spoke was naturally the crown prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Hong. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, Crown Prince of the northern tribes, you flatter me. Since everyone has come from afar, please come in and have a cup of tea before resting at the post house. Yellow Hong looked at Yi Li with some surprise, then said with a smile, "Thank you, Wang Fei." Princess Anqi stepped forward and said with a smile, "Princess Ding, long time no see. How have you been?" Yi Li felt a little embarrassed when she saw Princess Anqi's bright smile. She had deceived Princess Anqi more than once in Nanzhao, yet Princess Anqi was still speaking to her in such a pleasant manner. She wondered how much faith Su Qingchen had given her. Princess Ding nodded and said with a smile, "Big sister princess, I trust you have been well since we last met. It just so happens that big brother is also in Ruyang. Princess, you can reminisce about old times with big brother." Everyone knew that Princess Ding did not have an elder brother in her family, so who else could she call big brother? Yi Li wasn't afraid to tell everyone that Su Qingchen was in the northwest. She didn't want the Su family to hide. Since she had to tell her sooner or later, it was no big deal to tell her now. Sure enough, Princess Anqi smiled more happily after hearing the news about Su Qingchen. She said with a smile, "Thank you, Wang Fei." "Princess Ding, how have you been?" Lei Tingfeng from the West Hill came forward to greet her. Although all the countries had some grudges against the Mahist army, the West Hill was in the most awkward position. Last year, the two armies fought a war and hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the West Hill died in the northwest. Of course, the Mahist army's Wang Fei falling off a cliff was more serious. Therefore, even if the two sides temporarily put aside their grudges and pretended to be at peace, they still felt a little uncomfortable. Mo Xiuyao stepped forward and held Yi Li's slender waist with one hand. He smiled at Lei Tingfeng and said, "Thank you for your concern. Princess Li is very lucky." Lei Tingfeng was also helpless. He wasn't the one who caused Princess Ding to fall off the cliff. But it didn't seem to make any difference if it was his own father. He laughed dryly and said, "The Wang Fei is indeed very lucky to have turned misfortune into a blessing." Yi Li patted Mo Xiuyao's hand quietly and said to the crowd with a smile, "It's rude of the Prince Ding mansion to let you talk at the door. Please come in." Mo Xiuyao snorted lightly and glanced at Genom of Gojoseon who was sizing up Yi Li. Then he stepped aside and let them in. Genom of Gojoseon said lightly, "I haven't seen you for a year. Prince Ding's kung fu cultivation has become more profound. I wonder if we can have a spar when you're free." Mo Xiuyao smiled ferociously at a place where no one could see. He tilted his head slightly and said, "I'll keep you company anytime. Princess Ding, it's been a long time. How are you?" As if teasing Mo Xiuyao wasn't enough, Genom of Gojoseon turned his gaze to Yi Li and asked Yi Li with a smile. Yi Li nodded lightly and said, "Thank you for Genom of Gojoseon's concern. Ben Fei is well. But Prince Ding's injury, is it serious?" Sensing that Mo Xiuyao's hand around her waist had tightened, Yi Li could only hate herself for not using more strength to take his life back then. Genom of Gojoseon seemed to remember the wound that Yi Li had given him. He smiled regretfully and said, "I will never forget Wang Fei's gift." Yi Li's eyes darkened and she said coolly, "Is that so? Ben Fei will also never forget it. Back then, I was careless and didn't hit the target." Genom of Gojoseon smiled and said, "Then this one thanks Wang Fei for being merciful." After finally settling the guests, Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li returned to the study. Only Su Qingchen was left in the study. Seeing them come in, he raised his head and smiled. "You've returned." Yi Li smiled and said, "Dagu is still busy. Aren't you going to see your good friend?" Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and said, "Anqi is here." Yi Li nodded and said, "Right now, Nanzhao doesn't seem to be able to send any other important envoys other than Princess Anqi. Dagu isn't going to see her." Just now, Princess Anqi's face was filled with disappointment when she left. Su Qingchen glanced coolly at her and said coolly, I will go visit Princess Anchi later. Why are you in such a hurry? Yili was helpless. Her Dagu was like an immortal that mortals could not afford to offend. It was really depressing. Walking through thousands of flowers without a single leaf touching him. No, he didn't even walk through the flowers. He just looked at them from a distance that was neither close nor far, neither light nor heavy. He made people feel that he was close and gentle, as if he was within reach. But when they really touched him, they felt that he was beyond the 9 heavens. Even her eldest aunt was slightly worried that her Dagu would see through the mortal world and cultivate immortality. It was not that Yili wanted to put her Dagu and Princess Anchi together. But these years, the only woman who could get close to her Dagu was Princess Anchi. Genom of Gojosian of Xiling, heir Genom of Gojosian, the crown prince of the northern tribes and the 7th prince, the crown princess of Nanzhao and Prince Li of Dechu state. Hearing Yili mention the people who came this time, Su Qingchen said thoughtfully, even if it's for the so-called Imperial Jade Seal, the people who came this time are a little too important. These people were the most important people in all countries. Genom of Gojosian of Xiling was even more important than the Emperor of Xiling. These people all gathered in Ruyang. If it was just for the Imperial Jade Seal, it would be making a mountain out of a molehill. Yili smiled and said, Dagu and Xiuyao are the same. They don't think much of the Imperial Jade Seal, but others may not think so. The so-called Imperial Jade Seal, whoever obtains it can obtain the world. Yili felt that this sentence had always been sarcastic. It should be, whoever obtains the world can obtain it. Whether it was the ancient emperor or the recent Gaozu of the previous dynasty, who didn't obtain the Imperial Jade Seal when they were close to the end of the country. If you don't have anything, even if the Imperial Jade Seal fell from the sky and landed in your arms, you would only be cannon fodder. Chapter 462. Ali is right. With the Imperial Jade Seal, you will have the so-called fate of the heavens. What's more, it is said that the great ancestor of the previous dynasty's treasure house contains the secret books of the great ancestor of the previous dynasty and the treasures left behind when the country was founded. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. In the eyes of those people, the most valuable thing was not the treasures, but the great ancestor's art of war. Who dared to compare the art of war with the Mahist army? Originally, there was also Genom of Gojosian who was known as the West Hill god of war. However, since Genom of Gojosian was defeated by Princess Ding, in the eyes of the West Hill soldiers, the Mahist army was simply Genom of Gojosian's nemesis. Genom of Gojosian was invincible throughout his life, but he was defeated by the Mahist army again and again. It was understandable that he was defeated by Mo Lu Fang. After all, the Prince Ding mansion had a long history and Mo Lu Fang was a genius of a generation. However, it was unreasonable that he was defeated by Princess Ding. A teenage girl from a scholarly family could defeat Genom of Gojosian who had experienced hundreds of battles. If she was not a natural nemesis, then what was? Speaking of the Imperial Jade Seal, Yili could not help but frown and ask, will Tanjiji come to the northwest this time? Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, Shu Manlin is still in Ruyang. Unless Tanjiji doesn't want her anymore, he will definitely come. Shu Manlin. Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and smiled. He did not know when the Saintess of Nanjiang came to the northwest. Yili smiled and said, I forgot to tell you. Speaking of which, you and the Saintess of Nanjiang are old acquaintances. Previously, the Saintess of Nanjiang mentioned you to me. Do you want to meet him? Su Qingchen rubbed Yili's head helplessly, ignoring Mo Xiuyao's displeased look. She smiled and said, forget it. I'm sure she doesn't want anyone else to know that she's here. The Saintess of the southern border was not allowed to leave the southern Zhao imperial city. If the people of the southern border found out, then Shu Manlun's position as the saintess of the southern border would come to an end. In Ryung City, people came from all over the place to participate in the grand event. This city, which was originally not very famous in the northwest, suddenly became bustling and lively. Many foreign peddlers had appeared on the streets, peddling various goods from the pass, Western Hill, Northern Army, and Southern Zhao to the pedestrians. The various inns, restaurants, and tea houses in the city were also filled with people. It was not only the envoys from the imperial court who entered the city every day. There were also merchants from various places, swordsmen from Jianghu, and even travelers. The entire Ryung city appeared to be unprecedentedly lively and prosperous. Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion was a newly opened singing and dancing establishment in Ryung City, but in less than 2 months, it had become the #1 singing and dancing establishment in the Northwest. But Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion was completely different from ordinary brothels. The girls of Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion only sold their skills and not their bodies. Rather than calling it a singing and dancing establishment, it was better to call it a restaurant. Because not only were there the most beautiful girls, there was also the best wine and the most delicious wine. Here, you could find girls to listen to music and dance, but you could not have girls accompany you to drink, let alone other services. Therefore, Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion not only entertained male guests, but also female guests. But people had this kind of temperament. The more you were not allowed to do something, the more you would think she was the best. After all, listening to music, drinking wine, and admiring beauties was the same. Going to a brothel and drinking tea at Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion, the latter was more elegant. Moreover, the beauties in Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion were genuine beauties. They didn't have the heavy makeup and coquettish voices of those in brothels. Each and every one of them wore the same style and color of clothes as they served dishes in Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion. As for those who performed music, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, singing and dancing, they were the beauties of beauties. Not to mention these barren lands without many beauties in the northwest, even the scholars and poets from Jiangnan would be intoxicated. Yili sat in a wing room on the second floor of Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion, leaning against the window and looking outside. It was already night, but all of Ryung City was brightly lit like it was daytime. There was a high platform across from Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion. It seemed to be playing some kind of arena game. There was a flow of people downstairs, and it seemed to be more lively than during the day. "It's so late, Wang Fei, why have you come out?" Yaoji was wearing a red robe. Her beautiful face had recovered 70 to 80%. She did not look as beautiful as before, but people felt she was more gentle and moving. Pushing open the door and coming in, Yaoji leaned against the door and asked with a smile. Yili smiled faintly and said, "I had nothing to do, so I came out to see. You've managed Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion well." Yaoji curled her lips and said, "Yes, it's good. I have to thank you for your kindness, Wang Fei. Otherwise, it would be a pity for so many beauties in Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion to become prostitutes." Yili looked at her with a faint smile and said, "Who said that beauties must open brothels? There are many brothels under Tianyi Pavilion. It's not worthwhile to open another one. And all of the Black Cloud Cavalry could be said to be 1 in 100 master archers." Yaoji looked outside and suddenly smiled. "Wang Fei, are those the young generals of the Maoist army?" Yili looked outside and saw that a few young generals had squeezed to the front of the crowd. It was Yun Ting and the young general called Qin Yun who had fought with Yili in the Maoist army camp. It seemed that the two had a good relationship now. Yili stood up and smiled. "Let's go and see what's so special about the northern tribe's master archers."